Council Chair, we are now live.
Thank you, everyone. This meeting is called to order. This is the Special Committee on Gun Violence, September the 3rd, 2020. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligence prior to the hearings. It can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Will the clerk please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that they are present when their names are called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak.
Councilmember Green. Councilmember Green.
I am present and ready for the hearing and multitasking with my sons.
Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Brooks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here.
Councilmember Jones.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee as well as the viewing public.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Good afternoon. I'm looking forward to this afternoon's conversation. Thank you to the chair and to Councilman Jones for your leadership.
Councilmember Dom.
Good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to the hearing.
Councilmember Gim.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am present.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman, Councilman Jones, thank you for having this hearing.
I believe that's all members present, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, this is Councilwoman Bass. I'm present as well.
Thank you, Councilwoman Bass. Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Special Committee on Gun Violence regarding Resolution 170609. Will the clerk please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution 170609, authorizing the creation of a special committee on gun violence prevention to address Philadelphia's enduring plague of gun violence by facilitating coordination among stakeholders and formulating a comprehensive gun violence prevention strategy.
I want to also acknowledge that Councilwoman Catherine Gilmore Richardson is also in attendance. This hearing of City Council Special Committee on Gun Violence is a follow-up to a two-day hearing I convened last month on our gun violence crisis. That hearing had a long witness list and addressed a broad range of topics. Today we are here with a much shorter witness list to take a deeper dive on a specific subject, the enforcement of our existing gun laws. The Pennsylvania General Assembly has taken aggressive action to block cities like Philadelphia from regulating guns for the safety of our citizens. But that does not prevent us from ensuring that the laws already on the books are enforced fully. With that in mind, we will hear today from our Police Commissioner, Danielle Outlaw, our District Attorney, Larry Krasner, Chief Deputy Attorney General, Brendan O'Malley, our Judge of our criminal courts, President Judge of our criminal courts, Leon Tucker, Supervising Judge of our criminal courts, Leon Tucker. My goal is to answer the question I'm often asked when I'm out and about for my constituents. They say, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, as you are addressing this issue of gun violence, where are the guns are coming from? And so today, we will focus on not only the trafficking of illegal guns, the flow of illegal guns, but how individuals who are caught with the possession of guns are arrested, how they are prosecuted, how they are addressed as it relates to our court system. For myself, I'm at a point where I know that this is going to take a comprehensive approach for us to address this issue as the city. But I honestly feel like the bad guys are winning. I just had a quadruple shooting in my neighborhood last night. 2 17-year-olds were murdered. I personally know both of the young men's family members who are from South Philly, particularly the Point Breeze community. And so this is a very, very serious conversation. We also have provided the answers from the questions from the Office of Violence Prevention that were asked on the last hearing. And what I do remember during the last hearing, Councilman Curtis Jones asked the question when Commissioner Daniel Outlaw talked about collecting 77 guns per week over the last several months. And it kind of begs the question, if we're taking so many guns off the street and we still have a significant amount of shootings taking place, what are we doing wrong? What could we be doing better? Are there more guns coming in to our city? Are individuals who are being arrested, getting arrested and going back out on the street and getting more guns and committing acts of crime and violence? And so we want to do a deeper dive on that topic today, because at the end of the day, we're not going in the right direction when it comes to how we're addressing this issue of gun violence. Again, I'll say for the record, I believe we are losing as a city. And so for me, this hearing is about doing a follow-up and making sure that we're laser-like focused on addressing the issue of gun violence here in the city of Philadelphia. I'm going to turn on the remarks over to Councilman Curtis Jones, who's Chair of Public Safety. He has some slides that he's going to present to open up this discussion, and then the clerk will call the first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first say thank you for some years ago spearheading this topic when it wasn't the flavor of the month, when people weren't focused in on it. Some people were doing their individual things, but it was not at critical mass like it is today. I remember when you established this committee, one of the first things we did was we took a field trip up to Valley Forge to a gun show. If you could imagine a football field full of tables, all of those tables full of guns and ammunition. We looked at people buying guns, going out into the parking lot and reselling guns to people wholesale. We backed out of that particular gun show. We looked at each other. It was like out of the movie Jaws. We looked at each other and said, we're going to need a bigger boat, because we knew the problem was so massive. As we've evolved, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for keeping us focused. There is a urgency, not just of now, but an urgency of right now. And I want to illustrate that with some slides. Just one slide. Since the last, Sam, can you put that up for me? Since the last time we had a hearing, this is what has happened. We went from 259, and if we count the two last night, that makes it 261 homicide, 259 to 305 homicides in a matter of 3 weeks. That's an addition of 46 new homicides since the last time we got together to talk about it. Since the last hearing that you chaired, Mr. Chairman, we at that time had 1,891 shootings. Since that time, we've gone up to 2,236 shootings, if you include the ones last night. Shooting victims since the last hearing was at 1,139. It is now at 1,336 if you include the ones last night. That's a addition of 195. When I suggest to you that there's an urgency, not of now, but of right now, this illustrates it clearly. Now, that's the bad news. Mr. Chairman, let me give you what I believe as a participant in this process, along with you and this committee. is some fairly good news, glimmer of hope. I used to say that phrase that if 300 whales washed up on the shores of the Delaware, that every marine biologist and all of their resources would come to examine whether it was some type of a virus that killed these whales. Well, we have 303 shootings now, deaths now, and I'm beginning to actually see, Mr. Chairman, a critical mass of city resources, and they're in individual silos, but I am beginning to see the basic ingredients that it will take to curb this, not just from the police department, not just from the district attorney's office, but from the community. Community solutions that are being put forward, gun violence initiatives that they want to do. I haven't heard from the Fruit of Islam since the late 70s, early 80s that want to step up and do neighborhood safety walks and things like that. I believe sincerely at the beginning of this hearing that we have the ingredients that it can begin to stem the tide of gun violence in the city of Philadelphia. What we have to do as a challenge, Mr. Chairman, is break down silos. We have to be able to own up to some of our own areas of responsibility, whether it is job creation. We got to step up to the plate, as you say, Mr. Chairman, whether it is, are we being too genteel with people with guns? We should look at the last 100 shooters, Mr. Chairman, and look at it and say, is this your first time? Is this your second time? And if it is your third time, why are you still shooting? And examine that, look ourselves in the mirror, and make change. Because there is, and I close, an urgency of not just now, but as you can see in these statistics, right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilman Jones. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for their questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. And so as we prepare to call our first witness panel, again, I just want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Councilman Jones. I believe that we have all the ingredients to address this issue, but what I do believe is lacking is the fierce urgency of now and the political will of all of us working in conjunction, in partnership, aggressively on this issue. And that's my sole purpose of hosting this hearing as we go into our holiday weekend, because at the end of the day, I'm up at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, like I'm sure the rest of you are, when a young person is murdered in the streets of Philadelphia. And Councilman Curtis Jones, just for a point of information, we only mentioned 2 homicides in my district. But as I was reading, there were other homicides that were taking place in shootings across the city of Philadelphia as a whole. And again, I believe everybody has a role to play. But I do recognize that our chief law enforcement officials are here on this panel right now. That's what they are sworn. That's what they take the oath for. That's part of their job responsibility, if I could be quite frank. And so that's why it's critically important that this hearing begin to do a deeper dive in how do we address this from a law enforcement standpoint as well. And I'm a firm believer that if you got a gun, you got to go. I got my first gun charge at the age of 16. I was on juvenile probation, had a judge named Reynolds, He gave me the opportunity to get on juvenile probation, and then from there, I had a choice to make what I wanted to do with my life. And as a result, University of Pennsylvania Ivy League graduate, Mansfield University graduate, Harvard School of Business certificate, achieving, as well as former state representative. And so we got to let these young people know, either we give them the resource to get involved in something that's positive, but for those who want to tear down our community, at the end of the day, they need to be dealt with swiftly. And that's my statement for the record. Will the clerk please call the first panel?
Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. Director Thomas, can
Will the clerk please call the first panel?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Outlaw is with us.
I am here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. I appreciate the spirit of collaboration. And as I've said before, we really won't get to the crux of this unless we really sit at the table and have some open and honest dialogue with each other. With that said, please know that the information that we're sharing and the answers that we're providing today in response to some of the questions that we got, we do this with the full intent of also being introspective and recognizing and publicly acknowledging that we also have some additional work to do in our own areas of responsibility and influence. So with that, next slide, please, Director Thomas. I like to start off, this is becoming my least favorite slide. I know we've seen this one before, but I like to start off with this just to piggyback and reinforce what was already shared. And we basically just keep the same slide and we update the numbers. As of today, we are up 32% and 42% respectively as it relates to our homicides and shootings, including the 3 from last night. Overall, however, when you look at our overall violent crime and property crimes, Part 1 crimes are still down 3%. Next slide, please. We were asked last time, and I understand that, what we provided was really strategic and was telling you about what we were doing in the long term and sometimes in the midterm. But I also understand that doesn't always translate to what we're doing right now today. So I just want to give you a couple of examples before I get into some of the responses to the questions that we had. This particular instance right here was from a very recent incident, and it happened overnight between the 1st and the 2nd. Our narcotics field unit received information from some reliable sources regarding a drug location in West Philly where guns were being sold, including ghost guns. And as a result of that, the NFU developed probable cause to search the residence with a nighttime search warrant. The pictures that you see are a result of the operation with SWAT. We arrested 4 males and recovered 13 guns. 8 were handguns, 5 were long guns, and including in that total were 2 ghost guns. Additionally, various gun parts with numerous extended magazines and live ammunition were recovered. Also on top of that, we found a substantial amount of narcotics, including crack cocaine, marijuana, various pills, and U.S. currency, with the narcotics value listed at over $40,000. In the upper left photo here on this slide, the black and red item of evidence is an unserialized and unfinished receiver that can be used to complete a ghost gun or a ghost semi-automatic rifle. The 2 circled handguns to the left are Poly 80 ghost guns. I'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. And then the 2 circled items in the lower center are BB guns. And we just circled those so we can note the appearance of these items and how easily they can be mistaken for real firearms. Next slide, please. I'm not going to cover all of these, but I just want to give you some examples of arrests. As you can see here, we're making VUFA arrests on various dates very consistently in different parts of the city. The arrests here were primarily in the 24th and 25th district. And as you can see, there are multiple guns recovered with several offenders being arrested. for illegal firearms. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to go into all the details here. These are a continuation of some of the guns that we're recovering from the 24th and the 25th. But in some, the top right area is really where I want you to focus. So some time ago, I said that the average amount of guns that we were getting off the street were about 77. I was actually off. At that time, we've since seen an increase in an average of 82 crime guns that we're getting off the street and we're seizing on a weekly basis. Just in the last 7 days, however, we've gotten 139 guns off the street, which is 70% above the average that we've been seeing. And so far this month, we've gotten 470 crime guns off of the street. Next slide. I'm not going to read every single bullet point here, but again, this is just to give folks an idea of what we're doing on the day-to-day. So at a recent press conference, I said, you know, I was asked, well, what are you guys doing? What does this look like? And I said, in layperson's terms, the best thing I can do to describe is you're going to see far more police officers in areas where we know that we're experiencing these increases. But in other words, not only are we, increasing our arrests, but we are putting task force together to ensure that we're completely focused on the areas that we need to be focused on. When you look at the left side of the screen, this is just a follow-up from the last time. I won't go through all of them, but these are just examples of the asks that we've been able to put forth across to our partners to ensure we're not working in silos in real time, varying from asking for detainers, bail increases, prisons to assist us in investigations. We've had asks of PHA, SEPTA, the sheriff's departments, the marshals. But these numbers here are an example of how we're able to get these things done every Tuesday morning without having to, and actually communicate directly with someone in a position of authority to ensure that we have real-time deliverables and actionable items. When you move to the right side of the screen, these are just examples of some of the products that we're seeing and some of the outcomes of the operations that these task forces are doing. As you can see, there's a lot of money being recovered, including counterfeit currency, a lot of firearms, a lot of narcotics being recovered, which is, again, a common theme, which is why it's important for us to remain to have the ability to work in these task forces, because a lot of what we're seeing crosses our jurisdictions. And then also we need to be able to communicate in real time whether or not something is appropriate for federal charging. Next slide, please. So we were asked, what's the trend in the crime guns that we're getting off the street? The ATF and others throughout the nation have begun to emphasize the term crime gun. And you see there in the top right, the definition of a crime gun is any gun recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation. And that doesn't count guns from buybacks or turn-ins or guns surrendered to us for safekeeping. So these numbers that we're looking at, we use the term crime gun to distinguish our efforts to disrupt gun violence and target crime guns from arguments and politics of the Second Amendment issue. So we can be really, really clear. All of the data that we're discussing is related to guns that were recovered as part of a criminal investigation. So what you see here is that the crime guns recovered each year has been steadily increasing. But the takeaway from this slide is that at the same time, when you look back in the same time periods, our vehicle stops drastically declined, even though they were pretty steady, but they drastically declined in 2020 during the pandemic. But we're also seeing a decrease in our pedestrian stops going back to 2015. But even though our stops are decreasing, we're still seeing a steadily increasing trend line with the number of crime guns that we're recovering each year. Next slide, please. This slide really emphasizes time to crime and focuses on the average age of possessors that we're seeing here. We get asked a lot about firearms tracing. Firearms tracing is the process in which we come across a firearm at a crime scene, and then we want to retrace or find the origins or the sources of these firearms in order to get investigative leads. But what a key takeaway from this slide, you'll see that I'm going to work from right to left on this one. When you look at the right side, the numbers are higher when you're looking at the average ages around 25 to 30. And then when you move to the left, we're seeing ages 18 to 21. Time to crime, shifting to the left side of the slide. Time to crime is an important characteristic of crime gun intelligence, and here's why. When the time from purchase to the use of the gun in a crime is a long period of time, there's really less investigative value in the original source of the gun or the first sale that's obtained from tracing, because the gun might have changed hands multiple times, whether legal or illegal. But when that time from purchase to crime is shorter in length, we find that there's more value. So that's when PPD, the AG, the ATF, and other law enforcement partners, we all coordinate to investigate these occurrences, which sometimes will yield us straw purchasers, multiple criminal purchases, or other useful information about gun crimes. And if the level of investigation uncovered improper activity with a dealership, then the ATF would further investigate the FFL dealer. Next slide, please. It's a lot of words on here. I'm gonna do my best to not read them all, but this is important. So this slide talks about how we use NIBIN, which is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. NIBIN is managed by the ATF and it's used by local law enforcement throughout the country to connect evidence from multiple crime scenes, to identify firearms used in shootings, and to disrupt the cycle of violence. It's a database for firearms evidence that allows us, the PPD, to compare cartridge casings recovered at a crime scene to each other and other crime guns. Here, we call it our Philly Fast Brass program, and it's a coordinated effort between PPD forensics, investigations, intelligence with the ATF, and this all started in 2016. And as a result of this program, it results in the timely screening of evidence, entry into NIBIN, and then dissemination of actionable intelligence to aid investigations as quickly as possible. This slide here tells us, or shows a comparison between entries and the numbers of hits. An entry, again, is when we recover a fired cartridge case or a test fired cartridge case that's been entered. And then a lead or a hit is when there's an association between said cartridge case from different locations with each other, or a test fired cartridge case from a known firearm that indicates that same firearm was used at each of the related scenes. And so this bullet point on the bottom right is an example of a successful NIBIN entry. So due to our program that we have in place during a joint operation with the U.S. Attorney's Office, ATF, and ourselves, it resulted in the arrest of a very violent member of a notable street gang. And I can't give too many more details without disclosing more. But I'm sharing this because through the ballistics matching, that crime gun was identified to be affiliated with ongoing gang-related retaliatory shootings, and that it was responsible for 2 homicides and 2 non-fatal shootings. And that arrest resulted in not only the collection of a Glock that was previously reported stolen, but that person is still in custody and being detained on $1 million bail on state firearms charges and probation violations. We were able to do that because of the collaboration and, again, having our federal partners at the table to ensure that this happened in a timely manner. Next slide, please. We get asked a lot, what's the geographic distribution of recovered crime guns point of origin? And Councilmember Jones hit on this a little bit when he talked about, I believe, when he talked about his visit to the gun show. The majority of all of our crime guns recovered that had tracing data available for the source can be linked to Pennsylvania, and that's 73%. We know that Pennsylvania is considered a gun-friendly state, and because of that, most guns that are used in Pennsylvania originated here in Pennsylvania. They're typically purchased and stolen closer to where the people who use them will live. So what you're seeing here, again, this is just a breakdown of the guns that we've traced so far in 2020. 73% originated here in Pennsylvania. You see the breakdowns of where they originated, whether it's Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia here in the state. But you also see that the most common non-Pennsylvania source states include Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Delaware, Florida, and West Virginia. And to combine, that percentage is 16%. We typically don't provide a list of gun dealers. We do not maintain data on dealers that sold firearms. However, that data is accessible to us through our partnership with the ATF. It can be used to investigate a crime or a crime gun once it's been recovered to determine whether there were any inconsistencies in the original sale. So we have to be really careful with that. But again, I just wanted to be clear that that information, if we were to be asked, is not our data. Next slide, please. So this one here shows our top 10, where we find our recoveries of crime guns by police district. As you can see, the 24th and the 25th are leading. The most violent districts across the city are actually yielding us the greatest amount of gun recoveries. And if you remember from the earlier slides, pretty much all the guns that I showed you and the Buford arrest that we shared came from the 24th and the 25th. But every year, hundreds of firearms are reported stolen from burglaries and thefts, and then they're redistributed back into the illegal gun market. And that's what the numbers are telling us here. On the right side, the orange at the bottom are the stolen guns from autos and or theft from autos, and then the red on the top are the stolen guns from burglaries. But again, these are our top 10 districts for gun recoveries. Next slide, please. So continuing on with this, again, the data above is for 2020, but there's really no significant difference in the types of guns. So we're often asked, what's the trend in the types of guns that we're getting off the street? The semi-automatic 9mm pistols continue to be the vast majority of the crime guns traced year after year. And as you can see, it's about 77%. And 46% of those were 9mm. Yeah.
Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It's a point of personal privilege. This clip right here, this magazine clip, how many rounds would that hold?
You know, that's a good question. Director Garvey, is that something that you would be able to know off the top of your head from seeing these?
Good morning, council. Members, looking at that picture, I can't tell exactly, but looking at it, it probably holds between 50 and up to actually 200. It all depends, but they hold a lot.
Mr. Chairman, point of information, that's about, depending on the caliber, right? That's 100 clip. There's 100 rounds in that clip.
Correct. It all depends on the caliber. We see them going as actually far up to 200.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes. Next slide. So this is a continuation of the first slide. So semi-automatic rifles only make up 7% of the crime guns that we're seeing here. Because again, the most common crime gun we're seeing is a semi-automatic pistol. Fully automatic rifles or machine guns make up less than 1% of what we're recovering. We've gotten 3 so far this year. And people want to know a lot about extended magazines. Unfortunately, right now, data on extended magazines is not captured in any system. However, our notes are showing that these magazines, extended magazines, are showing up often in our submissions here. Next slide, please. So when we look at what's the trend in the number and proportion of the crime guns that are either ghost guns or 3D printed. As I shared earlier, ghost guns are the unserialized, unregulated, and untraceable firearms that are assembled by a consumer. So essentially they're buying the pieces and they're putting the guns together. So an example of this would be the Polymer 80, and it's sold 80% complete. And thus far, it looks like of the ghost guns that have been recovered in 2019, we got 95. And so far this year, we've only gotten 84. And we have not yet recovered any 3D printed firearms. I want to point out before we go to the next slide, I talked about how the ghost guns can be assembled by the consumer. Just a point on the 3D guns, they're really popular. Magazines and websites, and there's 3D printers and all of these things that are available to the common person. And once someone decides to use this information and utilize the resources, they really could produce a functional firearm that would also be untraceable by a serial number. And again, fortunately, we have not recovered any of those thus far, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. Next slide. So here are some trends when you look at proportions of fatal, non-fatal, no injury shootings. Again, the orange are the shooting incidences at the bottom with no victims. Red is non-fatal shooting victims, and then the firearm homicide victims are purple ones at the top. Moving from left to right, when you look at the numbers between 2015 and 2019, our fatal and non-fatal shooting victims have increased 15% and 33% respectively. When you look at our shooting incidences or firearm discharges with no victims, those have also increased each year since 2016. And since 2016, these incidences have increased 159%. And this may be due in part to some of the changes in incident disposition reporting procedures that we've seen, but we still know that we're experiencing an increase in our shootings here. Year to date in 2020, when you look at that last column, there have been 2,350 firearms discharges. And when you break that down, 12% of those have been fatal, 48% have been non-fatal, and 41% of these discharges have had no victim identified. When you shift to the right side of the screen, we're looking at our shootings, the same information, same categories pre and post COVID, and we're using March 15 at that date as the date to delineate. Our fatal shootings after have pretty much remained the same. Our non-fatal shootings, however, after COVID have increased 59%, and our non-victim shooting incidences have increased 7%. So when you compare the similar periods pre and post, our shootings have increased, but it mirrors previous year's seasonal increases. And then lastly for this slide, when you look at post-COVID 2020, there have been 653 firearm discharges that have comprised of 10% fatals, 49% fatals, non-fatals, and 41% discharges with no victims. So that's the same information that you see here. It's just translating the numbers into percentages. Next slide, please. So now we're starting to get into some of the nitty-gritty of the data. What's the trend in the number of incidents and arrests for gun homicides and assaults? When we look at our firearm homicides and our non-fatal shooting victims, they continue to rise each year, increasing between 2015 and 2019. Again, 33% and 15% respectively. Here's what's also of note, and this is why I say we all acknowledge, including us, that there's more to be done, specifically on our part. That trend line at the top are our clearance rates, and our corresponding clearance rates are declining slowly with a very notable drop in 2020. And again, I'm moving left to right, but it's still the same. So you'll see in 2020, that percentage for the trend line, that's telling us where we are. Our homicide clearance rates have dropped from 41% in 2015 and as of today, this changes to 29% in 2020. I want to remind folks that is that number right, Kevin? We were at 42%, but even still, it's dropped terribly. When I first got here for homicide rates, the clearance rate was doing really well. at hovering over 62%. And then it slowly got to 50%. And then in recent days, it was at about 42%. So I'm not sure if that 29 is accurate, but it could be. Our non-fatal shooting clearance rates have dropped from 27% in 2015 to 16% in 2020. Again, we acknowledge there's just a lot more that can be done here. And again, we are open to feedback and also really interested in implementing new ideas of creativity around how we investigate, how we partner with others to investigate, and really do some serious quality assurance in real time to ensure that we're incorporating any feedback to ensure that we can do better with the clearance rates around these issues. Next slide, please. This slide is the same information, but for robberies that involve guns, our arrests and clearance rates. And then the same thing on the right side with our aggravated assaults, arrests and clearance rates. And as you see, again, moving from left to right, our robbery gun offenses have actually dropped 25% citywide from 2015 to 2019. And our clearance rates have also been slightly decreasing from 21% in 2015 to 19% in 2019. When you move to the right side, our ag assaults by gun offenses, the majority of which don't result in a shooting or a firearm discharge, have only increased less than 1% between 2015 and 2019. And again, our clearance rates for these specific categories are slightly just decreasing from 37% in 2015 to 34% in 2019. Next slide. We're asked a lot about the trend of all arrests for illegal gun possession, or VUFA, where VUFA is the top recommended charge. So VUFA, which is, or a violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, indicates arrest charges for the carrying of an unlawful firearm in Philadelphia. And we break that down by it being showing as a charge, where it counts any crime where a VUFA charge occurred, regardless of any other charge. And we're seeing here, when you look at this, that it's been steadily increasing each year, except for an unexplained drop in 2018. Between 2015 and 2019, overall VUFA charges have increased 18%. And then when you look at the breakdown of where VUFA arrests are the lead charge, which counts only arrests where VUFA was the most serious charge, we've also been seeing an increase year over year. Between 2015 and 2019, VUFA charges have increased 64%. Additionally, individuals re-arrested for VUFA with the previous gun charge or previous gun crime arrest within 3 years have increased from 10% in 2015 to 17% in 2020. And I was just told that the homicide numbers are correct. The homicide clearance rates are correct.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Acknowledge. Go ahead, sir.
Can we freeze frame? That strikes me. I listened to a lot of statistics. But did I understand you, I think, to say that multiple times they've been charged? Can you drill down on that?
Yes, and I can refer to Director Thomas if you want to go more into the data and how we got to this, but that's exactly what that means. This is showing that folks that were, if you're referring to that last bullet point, sir, these are individuals that have been re-arrested for VUFA, meaning that they had previous gun crime arrests before. So this data is for those who had previous arrests within 3 years. And so those individuals that we're re-arresting, we're seeing an increase from 10% back in 2015 to 17% in 2020. So these are folks with multiple gun arrests.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's any kind of gun crime arrest that they could have had within the past 3 years. So that could be a VUFA, that could be a robbery with a firearm, an aggravated assault, or obviously a homicide.
So does that red flag from the first offense not give you pause in the second and third, and then ultimately, is there a pattern where people who have the first charge are more likely to progress to the third? Is there a trend?
So on the next slide, the commissioner can go into a few other dynamics that may be going on. It's in terms of exactly the reason why, we would have to do a little bit more research to figure that out. But what it does indicate is that there seems to be a pattern between 2015 and 2020 where individuals, even with a record, are more willing to carry a firearm.
Okay.
And I want to go back and just clarify really quickly before we move to the next slide. I'm confirming, so the homicide clearance rate today is hovering around 47%, so it's not 29%. And we can move to the next slide. And this will be our last slide. So this one here, we drew upon information. It doesn't belong to us, but we pulled some information from the Open Data Dashboard because we were asked, what is the trend and proportion of VUFA arrests that result in a conviction? And I think this is the answers that we're all trying to get to. And if we're seeing decreases in certain areas, we all want to know why. If there are things that we on the investigative end that we need to do to improve, we need to know that. If we have issues, just anything on our end, we want to know what we're doing to contribute to these decreases that we're seeing. So what we're finding is that while our VUFA arrests have been increasing, the percentage of our convictions have been steadily decreasing from 73% back in 2015 to 47% in 2020. And then simultaneously, the VUFA cases withdrawn or dismissed are steadily decreasing from 18% in 2015 to 47% in 2020. And that's why, again, I want to emphasize collaboration is key in this. I think, and I'm looking forward to hopefully, some results with having ADAs on the ground, being in communication with the DA and the DA being open to hearing our concerns, and then vice versa. We're open to hearing any concerns that we have, but we want to know exactly what's going on. If our cases are being thrown out or they're being withdrawn or dismissed, if it's anything on our part, we would like to know what that is and the reasons why, so we can get those numbers back up there, and we're ensuring that anything that we turn over is successfully prosecuted, understanding again that we have a role to play in this. So with that, I will open it up for any questions. Again, I have my executive team here with me. If we have any questions specifically around the guns and gun recovery, I would defer to Director Garvey. Anything around the data, I would refer to Director Thomas. So we are here for questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Outlaw, for a very thorough and detailed report. Just a couple questions before I turn it over to my colleagues. One of the slides looked at the recovery of individuals who are carrying and using guns, and it's steadily increased without even using pedestrian stops in cars, and I would think also pulling people over, right? What tactics are being used? Because I know oftentimes when some people, believe it or not, in the African-American community, some folks are conservative and they will talk about stop and frisk, right? They got this myth that stop and frisk, if it was implemented, even though it still goes on, but to the level it was under the Nutter administration, people think that you would get more guns off the street. But we also know, according to the ACLU, there's been a violation of the individual rights around this particular tactic. But what you're saying in your slide is there's been a decrease in pedestrian stops as well as pulling people over in cars, and we're still recovering even more guns moving forward. So that stuck out to me, and I want to get an idea of what are you actually doing to recover that many more guns without using those type of tactics that some people may think, who are, depending on their position, are questionable. But obviously, you're still getting the job done. That's one question. And then two, also, do we have a database, a database of individuals who are known to carry firearms, known who are engaged in illegal acts with firearms. I was told and briefed that other states have a database system that actually tracks individuals. And I don't call it profiling because I live in the hood. I just know who carry guns and who don't, to be up front with you, right? And so I want to get an idea, have something like that been taken a look at? Have we taken a look at? And third, in terms of the homicide unit and that clearance rate, obviously I work with a lot of family members who are victims of gun violence who are advocates. I know you had a chance to meet with them some time ago, and I remember them calling me after the roundtable discussion that we had, and they had ideas around the homicide detectives being equipped with cell phones so they can work in partnership with the victims and family members of those who have lost loved ones to gun violence. And so those are just 3 questions that I have before I turn over to my colleagues.
Thank you. So I was jotting down your questions, hoping I'm capturing everything.
And let me put, and I want to put one more last one out there. I have to ask this for the record. And how do you go about, what's the procedure regarding paperwork when individuals are arrested? Because again, some guys on the street say they get off on technicalities, and those technicalities is based upon how the officers are basically processing paperwork. So I'm trying to separate fact from fiction, but also when we talk about individuals being arrested time in and time out, right? Some will say my lawyer pretty much found a way to address the technicality of how the paperwork was processed, and the individual gets a chance to get away as it relates to them being arrested from guns. And so those 4 questions I'll ask, and then I will let my colleagues ask their questions.
So I just want to put out there that for a lot of folks, database is a naughty, naughty word. But we'll do our best to answer that. I'm going to defer the question around tactics and our procedures for paperwork to the First Deputy, Mel Singleton. But with that said, I do want to acknowledge and make very clear that I do believe, and I've said this before, I do believe that stop and frisk is an important tool. But I also, also recognize that there are parameters, and we have to be careful. We have to balance and ensure that we're not over policing, we're not stopping anything that moves, and utilizing this tool simply because we can. That's where data comes in. That's how we're ensuring that, again, we're laser focused. It may appear that we're stopping more folks in a certain area because the crime might be higher in that area. There's a lot of determinants that may lead to that, but I also recognize, especially in light of this last report that came out, that is something that we have to pay attention to, and we're looking forward to rolling out additional training department-wide as it relates to that. Just really quick on the cell phone piece, I heard actually a few suggestions, not only around diversifying our pool of investigators or our detectives, but giving cell phones to all of our detectives. I recently had the opportunity to pop up in homicide, and a lot of the things that we recognized years ago, a lot of the tools that they need to be set up to thrive and be successful, they still don't have. So while supervisors have cell phones, the average detective does not. I walked through there, I saw folks sharing phones. They have to share terminal space. So if I get this hot video that I need to review, I don't have an open computer terminal with all the software needed to go and immediately view it. I happened to turn around in mid-conversation because I heard a click-clacking behind me, and it was because somebody was typing up a warrant using carbon paper on a typewriter. These things are unacceptable, and I think there's a belief that the PD has a budget for OIT, related items, and certain things that we don't. These things come from OIT. So I think we also, in addition to, looking at the things that we need to do to be successful to improve these clearance rates, we also need to give folks what they need in order to do a lot of the things that the community is asking them to do.
I agree. I just want to ask this one, and I have to ask this because it's on the tip of my tongue.
Sure.
We noticed, and obviously, during this past budget cycle, I know the police department didn't get an increase of the $33 million. I think the mayor had moved the workers who monitor the students that go to and from school, from the police department to under the managing director's office, which really isn't a budget cut. It's pretty much just moving and housing. The administration of the patrol officers who monitor our students going to and from school to another department. So I guess I want to ask, we have increased the budget 120 million over the past year since the mayor has been mayor. And so, and this is before your time, so it has nothing to do with you, but I guess it begs the question, y'all have the second highest budget expense in city government. First is pensions, and then it's the Philadelphia Police Department, right? 760 million, right? And I know a significant amount of salaries. I know some is overtime, so it still kind of begs the question: with that type of budget and that type of budget, who's basically prioritizing and saying, okay, with this type of money that we do have, we want to invest this amount of money into our homicide because it's important that they have what they need. I mean, it just kind of begs to ask that question when we talk about resources.
Absolutely, and I think that's a fair question. And I really think, depending on the time, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody who's sitting in the chair. We adapt to the needs and prioritize the needs of that time. So, we can chip away at some things. And, again, the supervisors did get cell phones. That was asked for and that was answered. But again, as technology changes, as the pandemic came, we see that we're relying even more upon technology than we ever had to before. So even the ask today that we have might have been different before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And what we put in there in the budget really were focused around accountability and also just saying, okay, here's what we need because we want to strengthen accountability, but really not realizing how much we would be relying upon technology moving forward and how this becomes normalized. But I also want to answer your questions about tactics and procedures around paperwork. So Commissioner Singleton, do you want to address that?
Yes, Mr. Councilman.
Hey, Mel, how you doing,
good afternoon, everyone. So in the past, strategically, we would, if we had a hotspot area, we would send additional manpower into that area. And what we found is that obviously that negatively impacted the communities because officers had the tendency to stop, again, to the commissioner's point, everything that was moving. Now we're more strategic, right? And now we are more targeted. We make sure that information is given to officers. We have a 59.6% decrease in pet stops. However, because we do know who our frequent flyers are, our recidivists are in the community for all types of crimes. And we have information and descriptions of persons and even names of persons that we know are, whether it's burglaries, robberies, shootings, information on cars. We do a better job of making sure that intelligence information is given to officers, and we are looking for descriptions of cars or known cars, tags, colors, individuals, making sure that we are stopping those folks. And what's proof of that is the fact that we're running into more guns as we are stopping less people. And so that's how we're doing it. Those are the tactics.
You said running into more guns as you are stopping less people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it could also be, and before we transition to the answer, the question you have about databases, sir, it could also very well be that folks are more empowered or emboldened for whatever reason to carry a gun. We don't know what those reasons are. I wish we had an answer, but we don't. Director Thomas, do you want to address the database question?
So just to repeat the question, it was specifically around databases of individuals that are connected to how we stop
known shooters. Yes,
known shooters. So while we don't keep a database per se, what we do maintain at intelligence and identify individuals within hotspot areas, like the Deputy Commissioner stated, that are driving gun violence in those hotspots. We understand that there's a very small percentage of individuals who are, and so we worked with the officers in the field to develop the kind of information necessary to share that information. And that's typically done through analysts both in the districts and with analysts at the Intelligence Bureau itself. We then take that information, we vet it with other information, and we combine it, and then we publish intelligence and provide it to the street. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's a database per se. It's sort of a rolling intelligence process, which cycles through the collection of information, the analysis, the dissemination of that information, and then the evaluation.
Thank you very much. Councilman Curtis Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you touched on some of my issues that with less stop and frisk, we are getting more guns off the street, which I'm impressed with. I want to go back to the slide with the age of people with guns and ask, is there a trend of them getting younger? Are they getting younger? Are we finding people in possession of guns getting younger? Second part of that question, do they matriculate into actually not just gun possession, but assault and shooting people with guns?
So I think my answer would be anecdotal. I don't want to give you an anecdotal response, even though after even meeting with some community members today, they told me that these folks out here are getting younger and younger because the folks who are now considered the mentors of the street are also young in age. And so we're seeing the varying levels of respect. You know, terminology is different that we use here in Philly than, you know, we use in from where I'm from, but, you know, in a lot of cases, an OG is an OG, and young folks don't have that same level of respect. So I think that's why we're beginning to see our shooting victims are also of younger ages as well, because when you even look at least one of the victims from last night, that was a terrible scene, by the way. But when you look at one of the victims last night, even though they were extremely young, they had several previous arrests. As well. So Director Thomas, Kevin
Sure.
Thomas, is there anything that you can use data to answer that with?
Sure. So I would have to look at the exact numbers and get back to you guys. However, I would mention that there's a number of factors that could occur to actually drive those numbers. We typically even see changes in census demographics in Philadelphia, where different cohorts and population of younger individuals may end up shifting how it looks in terms of who is actually carrying firearms or who's getting arrested for VUFA. But we could look at that and see what sort of trends that we detect. I'll get back to you.
So since we're looking at things, and if you were a part of putting together not only today's presentation, but yesterday's presentation, it was very well presented and thought out. It has restored my belief that we can actually put a dent in this and maybe, just maybe, stem the tide. I really, I'm optimistic that we have the ingredients to do it, but everybody is going to have to take their own hill, take their own lane, and hold their own position. So yes, we're going to create more jobs. We're going to double down on how to do that. But what I need you to research is the last 100 shooters, whether it was their first, second, or third possession and or offense. And did it result in fatality and or bodily injury? I need to
Absolutely.
know. And wait a minute, I'm not done. I need to know their age, because something at last night's roundtable with young people, one of the concerning things was that they did not have a sense of hope. That they believed their life was over before it even started. And that what's the difference if I go to school? What's the difference if I try to put my gun down? I'm a goner anyway. And if that's the case, we have a bigger problem than we know. And then final thing I need you to research is there are different types of shootings and different types of homicide. And they have preventive measures that are different as well. If you're trying to stop domestic violence, that is a whole different methodology on how to prevent that. We have the red flag law that we put forward Councilmember Johnson, and we'd like to see how that is working to take guns out of the homes of potential people that are going to victimize their partner. But if you are about this culture of Facebook, Twitter gangsters, that is a whole nother process that we need to follow. And then crimes of economics is a different one. So we need to kind of take those 100 shooters. How did you get there? Was it because you were trying to get Pampers for your baby? Or was it because someone insulted you on Twitter? If we can start to dissect that and start to dissect it, we can develop processes that might be able to prevent it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that presentation. I want to go back to some of the data sets you outlined around some of the gun shooting, and how are you tying in the gun shootings to the other activities related to the gun crime, drug. And I want to use the example, I know you looked at the 24th and 25th. Are most of those crimes related to drugs? And is the failure for clearance rate or the increase in recidivism related to a particular activity like drugs? So if we had to put those numbers in categories, and because I know this is not happening throughout the city, some of the shooting in North Philadelphia, Strawberry Mansion, is very different than what I'm experiencing in East Division. How are you guys using these numbers to inform that? And then give me one or two things we did well in the recovery of those guns, one or two things we're going to do better moving forward, and what should be my expectation as a district council person who represents those two districts about what I'm going to be seeing differently over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Okay, so I want to make sure that I captured everything. Again, for all the operational questions, I'm going to turn that over to the first deputy. But I do want to say that we are seeing some strong connections between narcotics and a lot of the shootings that we're seeing. The recidivism piece, don't know if we can answer that. And again, I think this is why it's really important to not only share information, because we see the numbers, but we don't necessarily have the why. If it's something that we need to improve upon, again, getting that feedback in real time, the ability to do quality assurance across the board, I think it would help us in that. So we can't really give you an answer. But I will turn it over to Commissioner Singleton as far as what works well. I think the examples that we gave in some of the earlier slides, we know work really well. I think we, specifically, ma'am, in your area, we know that the ability or the making ourselves available to work with our federal partners work really well, because it not only can identify larger groups of individuals, but we can really get some larger groups as well that have a larger reach. But we also know that the flip side of that is that those operations can take way longer than an operation that's put together and run solely by the PPD. So Commissioner Singleton, do you want to share some of the things that the councilwoman can expect to see in the short term, what works well, and some areas where we know we need to improve?
Yes, Commissioner. First, I'll say that in terms of motive, what we see in our homicides is that we have our primary motive is arguments, drugs, and retaliation, in that order. Arguments, drugs, and retaliation. And so we would need to break that out, obviously, per division, per district. We can absolutely do that. With that all being said, to answer your question, we know, obviously, that we are capable of getting guns off the streets. We're doing that well. What we need to do better is to make sure, as the commissioner indicated, that our seizure of these guns and the rest of these guns are solid, that they are provide the DA with the ability to effectively prosecute those guns. We need to make sure. We've had meetings with the DA, and we will continue to meet with the DA. We're also meeting with the Bell Commissioners, the District Attorney Office, public offenders, everyone, to make sure we're all on the same page about when we identify a young man that's a recidivist, someone we know that is a constant problem in terms of gun violence in our area, that we believe that we're all working together and we're closing the gaps and making sure that that particular person is held. And in many cases, we can save that person's life if we do that. So we're looking to do that better, making sure that included in our gun arrests, that we're better at it, and making sure that we're working with all of our partners to make sure that folks don't get right back out on the street, those who should be held. Those are the things that we're working on because it's important. Also, we know that our possession with intent to deliver arrests, we got to make sure that those folks, because we know that we rarely catch someone in the act of shooting, but we will catch them with drugs. We will catch our shooters carrying guns. And so we want to also close the loop between our partners. Again, the district attorney's office, bail commissioners, judges, making sure that when we identify a person and we get that information through the pipeline from our officers on the ground to the detectives to the ADAs that's working with us into the hands of the judges and the bail commissioners, that we are all on the same page with saying that if it's Mel Singleton that we identified, that Mel Singleton doesn't fall through the cracks. Right? Because we were locking this person up numerous times. So these are the things that we're working on to get better at. Last thing I will mention is that there was a slide concerning our shooting review meetings. In the past, those category of things, detainers working with prisoners, asking for probation and parole help, our federal probation officer help, the districts and divisions and detective divisions and units, individual units, was left up to their own diligence to do those things. Now it's coordinated. Now it's deliberate. Now it's every week. And we know now what we're getting. We know now that we're getting from everyone these requests, and we're able to follow up on them. So these are the things that we're doing better within the police department.
Thank you. And I know that former police commissioner Johnson used to say the police officer's main job is to improve the quality of life for the residents, right? And when we look at public service and this role, unfortunately in the East Division, the police has become the babysitters of everything else that's going on in there. And I know that the city and all of us are doing a whole lot of work around the opioids, the homelessness, and other things, and has forced the police officers to be on the front line. They're doing trash duty, they're doing food duty, they're doing all the things they shouldn't be doing, and therefore not focused. In light of the fact that some of the gun violence, and when you do the research, is related to narcotics, I'd want to see the police department be able to articulate a focus, right, a narcotics focused strategy in East Division, right? And again, I know that we have to get the administration to take the other stuff off your plate so you can focus in on that. But we need to get to, and I believe East Division, Lower Northeast, that includes the 15th police district, because we're getting a spillover to the 15th now. We need a focus review on the narcotics trade, the open air markets. I spent 8 years battling with Ramsey. I would say, what are we doing about open air markets? He'd say there'd be none. I'd list 12 corners off the top of my head, and we did that for 8 years. There's a sense of urgency now around reclaiming of these communities. So I appreciate the leadership of my council colleagues on this, and I can tell you that there's nothing more important right now than being able to get a handle on this. We need to all, right? People don't separate one part of government with the other. We all need to be confident when we say we're going to do things differently. We have a focus. This is urgent, and create our own public dashboard about how people are going to hold all of the units accountable. So thank you very much. And I know this is not easy work, and it's not for the faint at heart. And I appreciate everyone's effort in this. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I just want to quickly add that it's the reason why we're saying, and we will continue to say, that two types of arrests we have to collectively take seriously, which is VUFA, violation of a Uniform Firearm Act arrest, and our PWIDs, our possession with intent to deliver. Those two things we have to take, they are directly tied to each other. We have to make sure that those charges in many ways are held different and dealt with differently, because we have folks that we arrest repeatedly for drug crimes, and they are back out on the street. So some kind of way we have to do a better job of that.
So let's go back just real quick, and then we want to wrap up and bring on our next panel. if I don't see any other council members in the chat feature that has a question. Again, can we just, and I don't know if I caught this or not when I asked the question, the paperwork part, right? Because another part of this conversation, again, that keeps coming up is individuals being arrested, they come back out, again on the streets, they say, my lawyer can get a technical, you a tech and I'm out. But how does that work? Like, how do y'all actually solidify the paperwork to make sure it sticks to get folks off the streets so they don't be repeat offenders, they don't be a part of the revolving door of the criminal justice system?
So,
Commissioner, you want to go ahead and walk through the process? But before you do, though, this is why I stress again the need for a strong quality assurance program, a system in place, so that if there is a technicality or a procedural issue, an oversight, whatever it is on our part, we need to know what that is in real time. Because again, once it leaves us, we don't know what happens with it. We don't have the ability to follow it, after it's been charged for something initially. So I'm hoping that will improve over time. But Commissioner, go ahead and let folks know how this happens.
So, depending on what we're talking about, whether it's a gun arrest or possession with intent to deliver arrest, we have officers' individual ability to observe and articulate that information on paperwork. For instance, a site narcotics arrest by an officer, right? There's some particular things that you need to have seen, which is the exchanging of the items for United States currency. The officer document that site arrest on paper, and obviously after they make arrest, these things are placed on property receipts. The information is articulated on the paperwork, and we present that for charging. The technicalities could be challenged in terms of what the officer saw, right, and his ability to see. Distance apart from that, all those type things come into play in court in terms of that. So at times you would see situations where we got to do a better job of articulating our probable cause for the stop, right? And that's something that we consistently and constantly work on in terms of the police department. But other times I know that what the officer saw, that his ability to see and his articulation of that in paperwork is something that's challenged in court. So when I hear folks saying technicalities, and I know from actually doing it, what we see is challenged, and sometimes, depending on how it's presented, a case could be won on the defense side.
And I'm going to call up for Councilman Helen Gim. One statement that was made on both sides. When I say both sides, I mean on the prosecutor's side, and I'll let District Attorney Larry Kasner chime on this when he has the opportunity. But I also remember hearing an officer talk about this when I had a special committee on gun violence roundtable in City Hall in the caucus room. This Arizona versus white. Like, you can't just arrest a person because Ms. Maymay on the corner called and said, Ms. Maymay said a young man is staying on the corner of my block and he has a gun on him. So is it true that the officer can't engage and can't approach that person that's standing on the corner when somebody called and said it looked like they got a gun on the corner of my block?
Yeah, another challenging case we have is Commonwealth versus Hicks, which states that an officer cannot stop anyone merely because they see him in possession of a gun. And obviously we know in some areas of Philadelphia that's problematic, in addition to the calls that we get. However, you have to ask yourself, what is an officer to do when we have a call to a location and they actually see a person with a weapon? The officers are going to have to, because obviously we're not going to let someone get shot. There is a public safety issue here, so officers may make the stop, conduct the stop. That stop is going to be challenged. That stop is going to be challenged. In some cases, we may lose that, but we do get that gun off the street. And so not every time we can say it, because it's a predicament the officers are placed in. We're called to the location. We may actually see what we're being called to, but again, we have case law that says that we can't merely just stop that person because of it. So what do we do? Do we let someone get shot?
Okay, now I just wanted to ask that just for the record, because I heard it being thrown around a couple times since I've been having these hearings. And again, obviously, for the record, I'm all for protecting people's civil liberties. I'm black. I grew up in the hood. I know what it's like being pulled over in a variety of different circumstances. But however, I also recognize the environment in which I live in, right? At the end of the day, I live in Point Breeze. I've been here all my life, haven't gone anywhere, went to college and came back, and I live in Point Breeze. And I know a lot of people are terrified. If you talk to some senior citizens in my neighborhood, right, they're much more conservative and aggressive about what's not, about what should be being done as it relates to their safety. We have children going to and from school that don't feel safe. And so it's always that balanced approach, as the commissioner always says. We have to have a balance in how we address it, because there's some people that care less that we're on this phone call, on this town hall, on this committee hearing right now, trying to address this issue. Is a very dire and serious issue, but can care less about the people's lives who are roaming the streets of Philadelphia when they're trying to take a person's life. And so I just wanted to state that just for the record. Councilwoman Helen Gim, and then we'll bring up our next panelist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, Commissioner Outlaw, and to your team. Thank you. You know, obviously, I, like everybody else on our council body and the rest of the city of Philadelphia, are, you know, mourning the fact that last night's, you know, quadruple shootings involving all teenagers was really devastating. And that this was the second quadruple shooting that we've had in a week, which is, you know, just, it's overwhelming for young people. You know, I've talked a lot about what exactly happens, and I know that you sit on the executive level implementation team that's kind of tasked with overseeing the roadmap. From your vantage point, you know, especially knowing what happened to these young people last night and earlier, I mean, do you think that the current amount of resources that is set aside for social services as part of the group violence intervention strategy is sufficient enough to reach these families?
You know, I don't want to speak on behalf of them. I could say there's always room for additional resources to go to the social services side. Absolutely. I don't think it should come from our budget, but I absolutely believe that they should not only have the resources that they need, and some, because we're all saying the same thing, the same balance, but we also know that in a lot of these situations, you know, it shouldn't be police led, and they certainly need the resources to be able to do that, especially when it comes to those who need services right there on the spot, whether it's resources, box of Pampers or whatever it is. They need to have that ability to say, okay, here you go, even in most cases just to establish trust and even have the dialogue. So I would absolutely say that they, you know, resources are great. I don't think it should come from my budget. But again, I'm looking forward to how that unfolds, but it's certainly a need there.
Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to leave it that open-ended. I think the question is, do you think that you're the primary point of contact for victims and families for when these gun violence situations happen? I think it's more than just asking, like, of course, we all know that everybody can use more resources should more resources exist. I think I have concerns about whether we are actually doing enough on the social services side, because if it is primarily police point of contact, I think we're seeing some struggle about families being able to engage with that. And so it's asking whether, from your vantage point as a member, do you feel like you are the primary point of contact, or have we evened it out so that you are just one point of contact?
I wouldn't say it's evened out. I mean, again, as the program on that end begins to roll out, I think we'll see it a little bit more. But right now, we're all in reactionary mode. And as we see the social services piece expand, you know, they'll be following up on a lot of their own initiative, which they've already done, but just on a smaller scale. Right now, because there's so many shootings, we're the first responders. We're the ones that see it first, and then we're making the phone calls. So we're in pure reactionary mode. And so what we'd like to be is having the ability to be proactive and get out and about in these communities, which is what they're doing with the resources that they have now. But get out and about in the communities where we know the retaliation is likely to occur, or where we know the shootings have been happening historically, time after time and time again, instead of chasing the radio, like I tend to say on the police end, or chasing referrals. When we're chasing referrals, that means something has already happened. So I think it'll happen. But right now, because of the volume that we're all dealing with, I think, a lot of the information is flowing from us. But to their credit, they're also following up on a lot of things that they've initiated on their own.
And do you feel like for the families who are victims and sort of, obviously the victim themselves, but here we're dealing with like 4 young people, and obviously, we've had over 100 of them, impacted this year alone. Do you feel like there's enough wraparound services for those families? I mean, I guess part of the concern is that I know the school district gets like a briefing update and a report. I know that, social services probably get a briefing update and report. I'm sure the council offices get a briefing update and report. But who is actually coordinating the support services for the family, and especially for like when young people are involved? Who is actually communicating with that child's, that young person's school or counselor who's, following up and making sure that the family's been not just dropping off paperwork and saying, here's a phone number to call in case you need help, or, I'm not downplaying, I don't want to, downplay that kind of outreach, but I think it's like a much more aggressive approach towards enveloping the family with assistance that is non-police contact related.
So I'm not disagreeing with you that needs to happen. Again, I can't speak to who's actually doing it. Obviously, OVP would need to do that. We know that that's done, but how they do that, who they utilize, and how far they go, I wouldn't be able to answer that. But I will tell you, when we come with a uniform, we also come with a badge and a gun, and that's an immediate barrier.
Right.
And it's not just family. I used last night because it was the most recent, but it's been many. It's not just family that are impacted, it's the residents there that might not even know those who were involved, but they're traumatized because it happened at their doorstep, and they're reminded of this each and every time that they walk out. I was stopped by a resident last night who was in tears, who was shaking, and she was, going back and forth, vacillating between thank you so much for being here and please help us because we're so afraid.
Yeah.
So it's the trauma impacts a lot of folks, and we certainly have to have the ability to reach all of them. But again, you're absolutely right in recognizing that what we represent can be an immediate barrier.
So just to clarify this, and then I will just wrap up. But you're a member of the executive level team. Do you know who's actually coordinating the wraparound services, or are you saying that you're not aware of?
So I sit on the executive team, meaning that, we come together to collaborate and share where we are with our programs. But the down in the weeds information from the Office of Violence Prevention side, who exactly does what, I think you'd have to work through Vanessa and Theron and Shondell and those folks to be able to give you that exact information. That's not something I can do. It's not our shop.
Okay. And all right. That's fine. I think that there are other questions I might ask. I just wanted to double down a little bit on what the chairman was saying earlier about the cell phones, because I think I had asked that of you as well. And I think, one of the things that I guess I would say, recognizing that it's resources and all of that, and I appreciate the councilman reminding us about, the police department's budget. The issue about cell phones is not just about the technology, and I think we had talked about this when I raised it earlier. It's about the ability for victims to feel like they can pick up the phone when they're desperate and angry or frustrated and just need an update on the case, and they can't do that. It'd be great if they could do it 9 to 5 and that, the detective would be available. But it is, from my vantage point, it feels like cold to not be able to offer that to families. And so Again, just want to reiterate that this is not really about budgets and money, but about the relationship that we have and the trust that we build with communities and families, that when someone's like grieving, they just need a phone number, because sometimes that detective is the only person who has the information on the case, and sometimes the only persons that it feels like they can go to and turn to and say, do you care about this as much as I do? So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, thank you. Can you stick around for a little bit, if you don't mind? Or Deputy Commissioner Mel Singleton as well?
Yes.
Will the clerk call? Can the clerk please call the next panel?
Attorney Mirza.
Mr. Chairman. How are you, Mr. Chairman? Council members, thank you for giving me the opportunity once again to speak to the Special Committee on Gun Violence Prevention. So much to talk about. I'd like to start with an invitation. And my invitation is to call us back. I am inviting you to call us back in 30 days or when you see fit, because I can tell you I personally believe that the process of this hearings has moved things along in a way that is positive and constructive. What I hear and what I just heard from the commissioner, I think expresses a spirit of collaboration that is growing, that is very positive. I heard it in her comments, in her data, which is the result of sharing between our data lab, but also Director Thomas with the department. There's some very, very capable data people who are doing something very difficult, which is bringing more data on prosecution and on crime to the DA's office, to the PPD, and to Philadelphians than I've ever seen in the past. So I'm very heartened by hearing the spirit of collaboration, the candor. I agree in large part with the data that was shown and was expressed by the PPD. And I think it's an excellent first step towards doing exactly what the commissioner just expressed that she wants to do, and exactly what I want to do. And that is, I'm an old car mechanic. You're going to fix a car, you better figure out what parts are broken. You don't want to switch the water pump when you need a gas pump. And the only way we're going to fix anything is by measuring it. I know we're not perfect. The commissioner obviously acknowledges, like any person, the PPD is not perfect, but the best we're going to be able to do is by measuring things and working together. And I take all of her comments very much in that light. I was also struck by her comment that last night, the shooting of 4 young people was a terrible scene. And she spoke about the neighbor coming up, crying and fearful. She also, I can tell you, because I was at that scene, as was First Deputy Commissioner Singleton, as was Director Garvey, as was Anthony Voci, my Chief of Homicide, as was G. Lamar Stewart, our Chief of Outreach here, and a few other people. One of the first things that the commissioner said to me last night after she was interviewed was that the news asked her what she had to say, and she said, I don't have words. How do you? So you go to a scene like that, you're walking around, after 10 p.m., dark, row houses, not especially well lit, you're near 18th and more, streets are slick, and there's a puddle of blood, and it's getting rained in. And that puddle of blood is where a 17-year-old used to be, and he was breathing before he was scooped up and taken away. And he's not the only 17-year-old who died there. You have another 17-year-old shot in the hospital. You have another 18-year-old shot in the hospital. Let me be as clear as I possibly can. The job of this office is to prosecute people who do things like that. And it's to prosecute them justly, and it is to prosecute them vigorously. And it is to make sure that they are accountable for the harm they have done to everyone. And that harm is not just taking the lives of 2 young people, barely adults, on the cusp of being adults, and harming the others. That harm includes the fact that as I walk down those streets, those neighbors in those row houses, well-maintained row houses, were either hiding, or if they were looking out the window, they looked like they'd seen something pretty terrible. And as I walk behind a woman in scrubs, probably a nurse coming back from a hospital on her way home, she turns left to see the caution tape. She turns right to see all the police officers and their cars that are pulled up. She turns over there, she sees the blood in the street, and you know the first thing she does when she goes in that house is throw every lock that she's got and wonder whether she should ever come out for anything but to go to work. The harm that is served on these communities, the harm that is served by that trauma to everyone in that community, by building fear in that community, by making it so kids cannot play in that community, is almost beyond measure. And then there is also the harm that very young people, and it was very young people, have served on themselves, because it's a cliche, but I'll say it. It's either the cemetery or the penitentiary. They did not just end the lives of 2 young people that day. If they are caught, and I'm very hopeful they will be, they have in many ways ended their own lives, because they will be prosecuted justly and very vigorously, and they will serve an appropriately lengthy sentence of incarceration for what they did. You walk around a scene like that, you know, it gets to you, and it makes you think about other scenes. Makes you think about Zamar Jones, where Councilman Jones and I have been twice. The 7-year-old killed on his porch, playing with a toy. Or Siani Small, 16-year-old at 22nd and Sedgley. Nicolette Rivera, 2 years old, 3300 block of North Water Street. Or Demetrius Moore, Angelo Walker, 2 15-year-olds, one from North Philly, one from Overbrook. You think about that, because that is how devastating this is for those communities, for those families, for every single person involved. And this office is dedicated to working with the PPD, working with council. We will work with anybody who wants to work with us, including every grassroots organization, and we had a bunch of them in my office just the other day. We will work with anyone who wants to work with us, because this has to change. Now, obviously the root causes of gun violence are many. We have a culture that glorifies violence. We have 400 years of systemic racism. We have 60 years of massive disinvestment in Philadelphia's Black and brown communities, 40 years of mass incarceration, and everything that goes with that. We have the effects of the 2008 Great Recession, which robbed so many homeowners, often African American and other communities, of family wealth. We have the closing of 23 public schools, mostly in the Black and brown community. We have an accelerated gentrification, pushing Black and brown communities into smaller and smaller areas. And now we have a pandemic, COVID-19, that has killed over 180,000 people, infected millions, caused hundreds of millions to isolate themselves in their homes, millions of people to be unemployed, and caused major institutions like churches, mosques, synagogues, businesses, gyms at best to go virtual, and in many cases to have to shut down. These factors correlate with a major spike in gun violence of 31% or so. Right now in Philly, we're over 300 murders, but we are not alone. Sadly, there are some cities, Milwaukee I think is one, where we see increases in gun violence that are 89%. It is almost every city, and if you look at a list of the cities, by the way, Mr. President, that are run by Republicans, you'll find out they got exactly the same problem. The only way to deal with this is a major united effort by all of Philadelphia's institutions, public and private, and that is how we're going to effectively combat it. The primary work of the DA's office obviously is not prevention, but we do have to talk about prevention. Our primary work is deterrence through the fair and effective administration of justice, and we're stepping up to that challenge. Let me be a little more specific. We have not been able to try a homicide case since early March. It's September, folks, but we will be trying our first homicide case starting on Tuesday in the Court of Common Pleas. Thank goodness the courts, which have operated in a minimal way, are now trying to open up. And there are tremendous challenges that come with that. We may need your help with some of the challenges that come with that. But thank goodness we are able to start getting back to business when it comes to prosecuting homicide cases, prosecuting shootings, prosecuting rapes, prosecuting the most serious cases, and also trying to resolve less serious cases as we do. Punishment obviously only comes after the blood is already in the street. It only comes after we have all at some level and somehow failed. So we have to keep our eye on prevention as well, because it is far more effective in avoiding that terrible trauma. There is never complete justice coming out of a courtroom when someone has been shot or someone has been killed. There are 3 ways we do gun violence prevention at the DA's office. One is through victim support. prevention through intelligence, prevention through community engagement as well. The leaders of those areas in our office are the Reverend Myra Maxwell of our CARES program, which I think does go to some extent to address some of the issues raised by Councilmember Gim. ADA Chance Lee, who works in our new intelligence unit, and I think his comments will go to several of your concerns, including Councilmember Johnson's, and also the Reverend G. Lamar Stewart of our community engagement team, who is, in addition to being a Reverend, a police officer. And then we also have Deborah Watson-Stokes. Deborah Watson-Stokes is an extremely experienced and extremely capable prosecutor in this office for a certain number of years. I won't say exactly how many. And she is also the chief of our municipal court unit and a very experienced homicide prosecutor who I think is incredibly well placed to comment a little bit on what it means to have a dismissal and what it means to have a discharge of a case. And then I'll share a few thoughts moving forward. These participants will not be speaking very long. I would say 2 to 5 minutes. And I'd ask first for Dr. Myra Maxwell to make your comments, please, about the CARES program and our victim witness services.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The Philadelphia CARES program is one of the newer programs at the District Attorney's Office. We've been providing services and support to families of homicide in crisis intervention. So CARES is actually an acronym for Crisis Assistance Response and Engagement for Survivors of Homicide. So we specifically work with the surviving family members and community members and all of those attached to that particular decedent. We have been providing these support services in regard to Council Member Jim's comments. We have been providing support and services to over 800 family members participating in our program currently. We make sure that they are in touch with the various systems such as mental health systems, other victim services providers. We have, if there's an arrest, there's services provided within our office to support those in their cases of an arrest. But if there's no arrest, we are still supporting those family members. One of the things that I do want to particularly talk about is the work that CARES does is not just specifically going to be there and hold the hand of the mother or the father, but we're also there to talk to the youth and the young folks, and the coordinated effort that we're trying to do now is working with the school systems to make sure they're aware that there has been a traumatic incident in the life of that child, of course with the consent of the parents. We have to do those things because we have to connect the dots, but we have to certainly make sure that we are destigmatizing mental health issues, because many of those folks that we, when we talk about the gun violence in our city, some of it is out of retaliation, which we know, but we are talking to some of the young people on scene or in the immediate aftermath of a homicide death, to make sure that we are talking to them about retaliation and we're de-escalating situations so they don't become more volatile. So that is part of what the CARES program is providing through our services under the District Attorney's Office. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. I now call on Chance Lee, who's the head of our new intelligence unit within the DA's office.
Yes, good afternoon. So basically, as Deputy Commissioner and the Commissioner stated, we're trying to be less reactionary and more proactive, just generally, across the board. And that's kind of what we're going towards with the addition of intelligence into the District Attorney's Office. We're doing things that we really haven't done previously. We have a gun violence task force that has partnered with the AG's office and the ATF. And I know the Commissioner explained at length about NIBIN reports. Those are crucial in what we're doing right now. We are using those NIBIN reports to backtrack and go through prior shootings that connect to new shootings, based on who's connected to those VUFA cases, who's connected to those guns. And they lead group investigations also with the Gun Violence Task Force. And how we're focusing those investigations is through intelligence. Through the intelligence we receive from our partners, to be able to identify dangerous groups of people, dangerous groups that are committing all the gun violence in Philadelphia. And to go to some of the questions and concerns you had, Councilman Johnson, I know you talked about going to a shooting, where they were doing gun purchases and things of that nature. Straw purchase investigations are one of the things our gun violence task force focuses on heavily. So they have agents looking out for the people that are trying to get guns into the hands of people that shouldn't have them in the first place. We are also working closely with the PPD and the managing director's office to put together and work with the GVI program. That's using our district attorneys and assistant district attorneys to go out into the community, using their intelligence to identify different groups and give the message that we need them to stop shooting. But if they don't, we are going to use our resources to come after them. Because as the district attorney said, the violence is out of control and quite ridiculous at this point. But the real focus of the intelligence division is to create more efficient pathways for information sharing. Now, I used to run the charging unit and help run the charging unit here at the district attorney's office, reviewing cases every day, all night that came in all the time. And we're also in charge of putting out what we say and who we want held in a courtroom in the arraignment process. So one of the most important things we can do, and one of the most important things we were missing before, was that link, where if we know who the bad guys are as these guys are coming in and we're reviewing these cases, we can request and argue and paint a full picture for our magistrates, our judges, to make sure these guys are held until their trial. And we can operationalize this intelligence through working with the PPD to make sure the sentences that are levied are valid, to make sure that, as the deputy commissioner said, drug cases, if you want to look at drug cases, if we can find out who is the driver, who are the drivers of crime, whether it be a gun case, whether it be a drug case, whether it be a theft from auto, if we have that actionable intelligence that we can operationalize to disseminate through our office, we can get better results. And that's what we're trying to build right now with this infrastructure.
Larry, Craig, I know we sent those very specific, detailed questions. Do you have data as relates to the questions that we sent over? This is going to be a presentation by your team regarding those questions. We can still have.
You're breaking up. Mr. Chairman, you're breaking up. Sorry, I can't hear you. Repeat that, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe I actually was able to make out most of that question. Let me see if I can summarize it and answer it, because we are having some kind of transmission issue. I believe your question was, in light of the questions from council that were forwarded to us, do we intend to answer them with data? The answer to that is yes. We have a number of slides that are prepared. The answer is yes. We have a number of slides that are prepared to be as responsive as we can. I do want to, however, make sure that we lay the groundwork. I probably have another, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes to lay the groundwork, and then we'll go to the slides. I have about 30 slides that go to your specific question. So if I may, Mr. Lee, thank you, sir. I think Mr. Lee has completed his comments. Let me jump ahead just a little bit, because we will be talking about cases that are withdrawn, that are dismissed. And I would call on our chief of municipal court, one of our most talented and experienced attorneys in the DA's office. That's Deb Watson-Stokes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Many of you all know me. I've been a DA for almost 30 years. 30 years would be the end of September. I spent the last 20 in homicide. So I think I'm probably an expert in murder, just because I've done it the longest and the most. Just to kind of give you some information about our gun cases and what has been some of the patterns that we have seen, and some of the issues that have to do, or some of the things that the data is going to reveal. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, the number one reason why our VUFA cases are discharged, they have to do with the complainants. They're the people that actually come to the police when the event is fresh, when the crime is fresh, and before everybody in the neighborhood knows that they told on the person that committed the particular gun offense. Later on, the case progresses. Discovery, which is mandatory, the names and information as to who's involved is mandatory by law, is given out, to opposing counsel. And sometimes they find that paperwork, in the corner stores, right, with their information on it. And everybody knows that they're the person who has told on the person who has allegedly committed that crime. And so what happens is, at that time, they're no longer motivated to come to court. They started off, they wanted to do the right thing. We want to support them. We've tried to support them, but a lot of times they just don't want to come to court. So we notify them. So what do? We call them up on the phone. We send them to subpoenas. We send police to their houses. And sometimes, even though we don't want to, we pick them up on bench warrants and bring them into court and compel them to testify. But we have those categories of individuals because they're scared, they're intimidated, and in some cases, they've made up with the loved ones that they've had the original problem with. And again, some people also have what we call unclean hands, meaning that, I'm shooting at you and I'm going to report that shooting, but also, I'm shooting at you because you shot at me, and so the police respond and they're in a situation where they really don't want our involvement with what it is that they're doing. A lot of them, they feel, especially our young people, they don't want to talk to us. They don't want to come to court. What they want to do is they want to resolve it and they want to handle it themselves. And what we need to do is we need to allow, and their children, I don't care how old they are, they're in their teens, but they're children, and their brains through studies are underdeveloped. We know that, and they have the most dangerous weapon in the universe in their hands, right? So we need to have ways, and we do have ways for them to allow them to help us. So the number one reason that a lot of our cases are withdrawn would be because of the witnesses. The second thing is something that the officer talked about. And I know I have 5 minutes, and if anybody me, I can go, for hours. So I'm just going to try to keep it brief. The second thing that one of the officers talked about is that we have some cases that are discharged because lack of evidence, which means that the officer had to make a choice. All right, do I stop this person on the street, get the gun off the street, knowing that the evidence is not that great, or maybe the stop isn't the greatest. And so what happens is we do our best. We have a lot of cases where there'll be 4 people in the car with a gun, right? It's a driver, it's a passenger, and 2 people in the back, and the gun is in the back of the passenger, right? The driver doesn't own the car. It's in the back. So who gets it? Does the passenger get it in the front or the passenger get it in the back? All right. Only there you can make an argument about joint possession, but the driver is gone. He's discharged because it's not his car. He doesn't have the knowledge. Front passenger, he's gonna say, "Hey, look, it's not my car. I was just getting the ride from so and so." All right, so he's gone. Back passenger is the same. So the judge they have to follow the law. We've gotten the gun out the street, but the case is discharge, lack of evidence. And the third way has to do with police attendants and for an example, an officer has military training, or you have the same group of people. You have the same group of people that do the same cases over and over and over and over again. So if an officer is testifying in another courtroom, and when another judge wants him right then and there, because they have to move their list, they're not waiting. Or if they're out on the street serving a warrant, they're not waiting. They're not waiting because it's a third listing and it must be tried. So there are a number of ways. And Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, what you talked about was a technicality. And, and I know what you meant because you're talking about discovery. That's a game, that everybody plays, with each other. Okay, I need the back of a 75 229. And if you know your paperwork, you know that there's nothing really on the back of a 75 229. So there are technicalities. So there are a lot of reasons, why these gun cases, are not are being discharged. But what I need you guys to know is that, as a matter of policy, we are rearresting, on those cases. We are requesting high bail. Every single solitary gun case, every single solitary robbery, and murder, you don't get allegedly murder. You don't get bail on murder cases, right? So we are requesting that high bail. Chance talked about that charging and the charging unit. And as a matter of course, we're requesting high bail because we understand that these people are allegedly shooters or will be potentially shooters. And these are guns in the hands of our children who have these undeveloped brains, right? So it's a recipe for disaster. But what we need is the support, of judges on the bench. When we make that high bail request, we need you to respect it, and know that we no longer have the position like we used to, that, we're just going to charge everybody with everything. We no longer do that. We are thoroughly vetting these cases. We are trying to get video on these cases, phone dumps or phone surveillance, so we know exactly where people are at particular times. And we are extensively using our education, using our intelligence, and we are really vetting these cases before they're charged. And so when we make a recommendation for someone to be held on high bail, we mean it. And the reason why we can say that with confidence is because DA Krasner also has early bail review. So those people who should be released are also released appropriately under a process. So I have a lot to say, but right now, I'm going to leave. But we are fighting a war, and the mentality is that they'd rather be judged by 12, than carried by 6. And we need to change that. We're the adults. And I agree with what Councilman Jones said. We need to plow our own road. And I don't want to go over to G. Lamar's part because I know he's going to talk about us taking it to the streets and being embedded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess you could all hear the passion there, right? That is our MC Chief, Deb Watson-Stokes. Let me move ahead quickly and let's give G. Lamar Stewart a moment to talk about what we're doing with community engagement before I get into these slides.
Thank you, DA Krasner, and good afternoon to City Council and to all those who are here with us today. So we believe there is a correlation between poverty and crime. And so through our community engagement unit, we are committed to working with community-based organizations, community activists, with faith-based partners, with those who are returning home from incarceration, to connect with those who are drivers of violent crime, those who are in deep poverty, those who are living in marginalized spaces, to get as many resources to them as possible. One of the ways we do that is through our monthly one-stop job and resource hub. In fact, this month, today, is our 1-year anniversary since we've launched this hub through the DA's office. The hub is actually
going on right now, right?
It's going on right now, council member. So in fact, it ends at 5. So my team is in the other room running the virtual hub as we speak. We've been able to connect 2,825 people to services. Those services include employment services, victim services, housing, and other social services. But we've been able to approximately 2,825 people to services through our one-stop job and resource hub. Leading up to that hub, as I said, we connect with community-based organizations, some including Black Men Unifying Black Men, Black Male Community Council of Philadelphia, Man Up out of SCI Phoenix, Muslim Humanity. We're connecting with those who are both social influencers and those who are credible messengers in the streets to help us build relationships and really get to those who are in the communities who need these services, particularly those young men and young women that we know who are being recruited into the life. And so One Stop is one of the ways that we connect with the community. We're also partnering with 12 schools citywide, both middle schools and high schools, 2 schools in every police division. Our community engagement liaisons, the 3rd week of every month pre-COVID, would actually go to those schools. But during, of course, now that classes and schools are in a virtual space, we're connecting with the students this year in a virtual capacity. And we're talking to them about bullying, about peer pressure, about gun violence. We're listening to them and also them into the DA's office so that we can hear from them around solutions and ways that we can support them, because we believe that real solutions are in the community. Thirdly, the DA, and with the help of our community engagement unit and other units within our office, we launched the Gun Crime Strategy and Prevention Collaborative, as the DA mentioned, on June 1st. Through that collaborative, we've been able to assign 12 assistant district attorneys and community engagement liaisons to every police division in the city of Philadelphia. So that's two DAs and a community engagement liaison to every police division in the city. And the focus is the firm prosecution of those who are the drivers of gun violence, to share data and intel with our law enforcement partners at PPD, but also at the state and federal levels, and also to focus in on strengthening our communication and our relationship with community stakeholders and residents. We continue to work very closely with our faith partners. Pre-COVID, we was meeting with about 150 faith partners, providing them with breakfast, but also having a very interactive conversation with our faith partners on the ground. And so that's some of the work that we're doing through our community engagement unit. And we're excited to continue to work with our partners in council. We keep our city council persons as well as their directors of constituent services abreast to the work that we're doing in the DA's office, but also work collaboratively to make sure that we're getting all the constituents and residents of Philadelphia the services and supports they need from the DA's office as well as other city agencies. So thank you for your time, and we're willing to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much, G. Lamar Stewart. So I have just a couple comments, and then I'd like to tick off 10 ways in which I think we can all move forward together and have positive results in a positive direction, and then go into these slides. I'm not going to spend an hour on these slides. We're going to go through them quickly, but I think they give a lot of the answers to the questions that were sought. You should be aware that the DA's office for several months now has had a dashboard. Unlike any of my predecessors, we've had a data dashboard that is updated essentially daily with new data. It's very interactive. If any of you are curious about more details on how to use it, we're happy not only to guide you to it, but to actually guide you through how it is used. Because, some people like me at 59, we're not perfect with technology, but we are happy to do that. And we think it should be a resource. Sometimes it makes us look great. Sometimes it doesn't. But that is the point of data. That's the point of trying to figure out what's wrong so you can fix it. Now, obviously, prevention is more powerful and more important than deterrence. Therefore, it's extremely important that we fully invest in gun violence prevention programs such as Cure Violence. This program has been proven to work all over the country, including Philadelphia. Yet still in Philly, we only have it in a few sections of the city. We have to move as quickly as we can to fully invest in things that have been successful. We should look at the GRID program in Los Angeles, and we need to do all of this now. If the city does not have the money to do everything, then we need to call on private foundations. We need to call on university endowments. I am volunteering to do that with or without any of you, but I'm volunteering to join hands with you and try to get that kind of an investment. It's good for them, it's good for us, it's good for the city. And here are 10 things that I think we should look at. One of them is the better use of funding for PPD. Yes, it's big, it needs to be big. But I will give you an example. A number of times I've spoken to council, I've specifically talked about the gap in modern forensics in Philadelphia. I've specifically talked about DNA needs that we have with reference to gun crimes, and also needs in terms of the analysis of cell phones. I cannot get into all the specifics for obvious reasons, NIBIN is good, but NIBIN is not enough. And we need to support our Philadelphia Police Department by getting them, one way or the other, the $2 to $5 million they need for the first year and the $2 or $3 million they need for years after that. I say this in the spirit of collaboration and support for the police department, but the PICA report just revealed that we have $50 million in overtime for the PPD in the first 9 months of this year. It's the largest amount of overtime in the history of the city, despite the fact that the courts are closed, so there is no overtime going to that. Obviously, there are good reasons why there's a bunch of overtime. But if we got money for overtime, we got money to solve the crime. We need to prioritize the kinds of things that will make it so it's not necessary that we spend money in other kinds of ways. Dr. Garvey can tell you all about that. And I know that the commissioner and I have spoken about this. I know that it's a priority for the PPD to have a 21st century version of the forensics that we absolutely need. Number two, data. That's going well. We look forward to it improving. Number three, we all need to work together to increase the clearance rate. Just by way of example, the clearance rate for shootings in the month of July, and by the way, the commissioner has been very clear about this and she's been very candid about it, but the clearance rate for shootings in July, 14%. The clearance rate for shootings in August, 9%, okay? There is only so much that the DA's office is going to be willing to do until the DA's office and the police department are able to collaborate effectively to bring that up. I don't say that to point fingers. I say that to take it on my shoulders to be part of that solution in any way that we possibly can. We need to improve the quality of investigations. There are a ton of great cops doing a great job, but it is 2020. It is not 1987. And we need to work with the police department as occurred in Chicago. It can be things as simple as trainings, things as simple as assisting with how the paperwork is filled out so that we don't have the kinds of mistakes that, defense attorneys or judges are liable to pounce on. We need, frankly, to have a new president and a new legislature in Pennsylvania that's going to care about gun violence. We cannot continue to have both a legislature and a president that are in bed with the NRA that think 3D printers making guns and ghost guns are okay. We just cannot have that. As long as we have that, we're going to be where Senator Street has said we are recently, which is 16 times as many guns per capita as New York. What do you think happens? Imagine we passed out hand grenades and said, please don't use these. You'd be hearing places blowing up all over town. We need to protect our witnesses. And here I am going to need your help, and I'm going to need it soon, potentially. We are starting our first homicide case on Tuesday as a jury trial. We're starting a shooting case, I believe, around next week, and 2 other jury trials. We have a situation right now. You will see that Deb Watson-Stokes is shaking her head because she and I are losing sleep over this one. We have a situation in which, due to the COVID, the current plan of the courts is to broadcast. And by the way, Judge Tucker's been very sensitive to this issue. I think he's very concerned about it, although I don't want to speak for him. But the fact is, we're very concerned at the idea of broadcasting a homicide trial over a YouTube channel. How do we protect our witnesses? How do we get our witnesses even to show up? Who is recording that trial? Will somebody get shanked in 5 years at the State Correctional Institution at Phoenix? Will this live? This weeping description by the mother of a homicide victim of how this affected her life, is that going to live on the internet forever for people involved in group shootings to look at? We cannot have that. So that is one thing we have to do. We have to make sure as the courts reopen that we are not debilitated from prosecuting appropriately. We need more DAs detectives. There was a time when the DA's office had 110. We're down to about 30, and I'm very grateful that the commissioner is supportive of our having more DAs detectives because it means there's more that we can do when we have a reluctant witness, when we need to work closely, when there's a gap in the quality of the investigation as it comes to us. We can go back and get that DNA swab, or we can work with the police to get that DNA swab to see if it matches the DNA on the gun. We need to do more wiretaps. This is something that should have been going on in this city for 25 years. We need to do more wiretaps, and I appreciate that the commissioner is also looking at this with us, and we have a collaboration to see if that's something we can do. And finally, we need to fix our bail system. And here is where it gets real interesting, because we did convene a meeting, as First Deputy Commissioner Singleton said, between the courts, the president of the municipal court, Judge Dugan, who is responsible for overseeing the setting of bail at the time of the arrest, and between the commissioner and First Deputy Commissioner Singleton, and also the Public Defender's Office, here Bradford Gray, and also our office. And we found a lot of common ground. There's a lot that we can do to change this, and I am hearing good noises coming from the municipal court that they are interested, because MacArthur is interested in going the right direction. It has a huge effect on public safety if we can get real high bails for the people who need to be held pretrial for public safety, and make sure broke people on non-serious cases get out. That's where we need to go, and that's not where we are. All right. I will now move on, and I will move quickly, I promise, through these slides in an effort to answer as many of the questions that were asked as possible. May we see the first cover slide? Okay, so this is obviously cover slide. Let's go to the next one, please. All right, so I do this very briefly just to make sure we all understand how this works. An incident occurs, criminal incident, police arrest. The case comes to the DA's office after police arrest and prepare paperwork, and they push the paperwork to us. And then we bring charges unless we feel that there's a problem with the case. And once we bring charges, the very next thing that happens, and it happens very quickly in Philly, is that the bail is set. The way the bail is set is in front of a bail commissioner who is not a full judge, who may or may not even be a lawyer. And this is someone, and I respect and like many of them, but this is someone who has never done a trial as a judge. This is someone who will never give someone a sentence, and someone who will never supervise someone on a sentence. What they have sitting in front of them is not as much information as I would like, and not as much information as the public defender would like, because it happens so quickly, sometimes 12 hours, sometimes 18 hours. That's fine for a non-serious offense. That is not so fine if we are talking about a member of the Brickyard Mafia, and there's more information that the DA's office needs to be able to argue for the $1 million bail that we routinely seek for cases like that. It's not enough time, because sometimes we need to get more information from the police, or we need to do a more in-depth search of all of these persons' prior cases to show connections, things like that. I won't get into everything we're looking for on bail, but it is a crucial moment. And then, of course, it goes through the system over months or years. There are outcomes, and then you have supervision, or you have incarceration where there is a guilty verdict or a guilty plea. Next slide, please. And charges in shooting cases. This data will get better. At the moment, it includes homicides of all types. The vast majority of our homicides are gun, but not every single one is. There are a few that are stabbings or beatings, things like that, or may even involve the use of a car. But overwhelmingly, they're guns. So this is good data on homicides. We just got to make it better. And then we have data on aggravated assaults with guns. Next slide, please. All right. So the point that I want to make here, now these are shootings, both fatal and non-fatal. We're showing incidents, we're showing arrests, and then we are showing the charges going all the way back to 2015. Our police commissioner came to a city that has had certain issues growing for quite some time. And obviously, everybody's looking for her to solve everything. Well, she's not going to be able to solve everything, neither am I. The fact is, we have long-term trends, and we have to work together to try to make things better, but it is good to look at the context and see where we actually are. So the CR, which is listed in blue there, is the clearance rate. And what you'll see is that the clearance rate in 2015 was 24%, 2016 it was 22%, 2017 it was back up to 24%, 2018 21%, 24% in 2019, it is now down to 17%, and I think we all understand why. These are really difficult times for the Philadelphia Police Department to try to investigate and try to deal with this volume of stuff that's happening. The prosecution rate has been fairly steady, and that is listed in the orange color there, which is basically almost every case that is presented to us, because these investigations generally are pretty thorough. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're generally pretty thorough. They're generally pretty solid. The prosecution rate on these cases has been 99 or 98% in all of these years, including this year when it is 99%. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next slide will give you basically the 5-year view, okay? The 5-year view. And that is that there have been over 8,000 shootings, fatal and non-fatal. Total number of arrests is under 2,000. It's 1,762. The total number of cases charged is almost exactly that. It's 1,735. Next slide, please. The next slide I think is very, very interesting because it shows a trend over many years in the clearance rate for homicide cases. Do we have the next slide? What you're going to see when this slide decides to come around, here we go. What you're going to see is what it has looked like since the 1960s, actually. But let's take a more recent point. Let's look at about 1985. You'll see a peak in the clearance rate in 1985. That was close to 100%. And we got to be fair about this. There were some things going on in 1985 that weren't perfect. We have seen some exonerations. In fact, my office has been involved in it, all right? So maybe that clearance rate was a little bit higher than it should have been because some of the people they cleared didn't exactly do it. However, there's no question that we see over the years that close after that, the clearance rate is 80%. A few years later, you get into the mid-90s, you got a clearance rate above 60%. You get down into 2006 or 7, you're at about 55%. We get into 2019, you're over about 40%. And I think the commissioner has already explained that obviously it's been worse for reasons we all understand now. But there's no question that there's a very, very clear trend going on now for, I guess it's 33 years, at least 35 years, a very clear trend of clearance rates for homicide cases coming down in Philadelphia. I don't say that to cast stones. I say that to put it on my shoulder along with the commissioner and anybody else who wants to help. Something we have to do. I believe it's closely related to the fact that our forensics are not modern. I'm sorry?
Point of information.
Absolutely, Councilman Jones.
Thank you, DA Krasner. For those of us who are not as versed as we should be, a clearance rate is that it went to trial and we got a conviction.
No, sir, and I apologize for not clarifying. I guess I live in my own world sometimes and I forget that I didn't used to, know all this magic language. A clearance rate means the rate at which the police believe that they have identified the perpetrator and are seeking or obtaining that person's arrest. So essentially, it's did you solve the crime? So what we are. So yes, sir.
Let me further, and I'll stop and let you finish. So if we are in the 20s, that means for every 100 criminal acts, we're only catching 20% to go to trial.
29.
29%.
That was an outlaw's presentation. 29%.
So that means if I'm in the barbershop and I'm deciding whether or not I'm gonna go commit this felony, I need to. They are wrestling with the statistic that 70% of the time they're gonna get away with it.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes. I don't know that they know the statistic. I don't know that they pay that much attention, but certainly they're operating with the feeling that they can get away with it because they're aware of others who have, or perhaps they have themselves in the past. And like I said, I say this only to try to shoulder that burden along with the PPD and the rest of the city.
But also, I just want to add, I think it's a combination of both. Mr. Krasner, I think a combination of if I feel like that I can get away with pulling this trigger and I get arrested and I'm not going to be prosecuted, and I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm just expressing what I hear when I'm out in the street, talking to different folks. Rather it's the lawyer that they get, rather it's beating it on a technicality. But most young guys feel like if they do get arrested and they do get and they go to trial, 9 times out of 10 they're coming home. I don't know the dynamics, and that's why we're having this follow-up hearing right now to kind of narrow in. But that's something on my shoulders because I know, on one is it's good to say, the best way to stop these things from happening is to be proactive and preventative. But at the same time, as a deterrent, I do recognize that when folks know that they're going to get prosecuted, they're going to do some time for doing something wrong, 9 times out of 10 also they take that in consideration as well. And so just want to put that out.
I hear you, Council. I hear you, Council Member, and I agree with you. I hope that this data will get to some of that point. This is our next slide. This is a slide that covers homicides of all types. And again, it's about 80% or so shootings and aggravated assaults with a gun. It shows incidents, arrests, and charges. As you can see, what you're looking at is at the high end of 41% clearance rate, which again means police have identified the perpetrator and are seeking the arrest. And then at the low end in 2020, we're at 26%. 2019 was 37%. It's fluctuated between about 40% and about 35% in the last few years. Currently, with the pandemic, it is at 26%. But once again, you can see that the rate at which these cases are prosecuted, 97%, 96%, 98%, is fairly consistent. Next case, because it is important that we talk about not just gun arrests, and gun arrests are very important, but it's important that we talk about crimes that are perpetrated with guns. We talk about the shootings, we talk about the homicides, we talk about robberies with guns, rapes with guns, things of that sort. As we look at robberies with guns, what we are seeing is clearance rates in the last 5 years between about 20 and 23%, prosecution rates in the low mid 90%. All right, moving on to the next slide, please. I want to go to the issues around bail because I know there has been a lot of question around that. We do intend to be releasing shortly a lot of bail data that we'll get into this specifically, but I'm going to try not to bore everybody to death today. Next slide, please. The most important thing I want to make sure. Yes, sir.
Attorney, can you help me out just 1 second, real quick? I just need your help with. Can we go back to the last slide just for clarity on something? I just want to ask.
Yes, sir. Can you go back?
It's an important question too. So from 2015 to 2020, the prosecution rate 94%, 93%, 93%, 95%, 95%, 93%, and the clearance rate 23, 23, 23, 22, 22, 20%. Right. So explain to me I guess the difference in those two numbers and the outcomes of a case.
Yeah, yes, sir. So the only cases that the DA's office.
Basically, what your number is saying is we're prosecuting across the board in the 90th percentile. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes. Let me make sure I'm very clear on what it means and what it does not mean. Okay. What it means is that the primary investigative entity, of course, is the Philadelphia Police Department, although we do work with them on investigations a bit when it comes to dangerous drug offenders and a bit when it comes to homicides and shootings now with our collaboration. Look at that handsome young man. So that's quite all right. So the point is that when you have, let's look at 2015, for example. 2015 shows 2,854 robberies with a gun occurred. And of those, there were arrests by the police in 665. They presented information to us, and the DA's office in 2015, before my time, brought 623 cases from the 665 that got to them. No police department is ever going to solve every crime, but it's important to see because we're talking about deterrence, it's important to see how often they're even caught and then charged. There are other slides that will go into additional data about what happens during the process, but that is what this slide is about. All right, if I may move ahead and talk a little bit about bail. Can we go forward 2 slides, please? So the most important thing to remember, and a lot of people are not clear on this, is that the DA's office does not set the bail. I repeat, the DA's office does not set the bail. Neither does the defense attorney, neither does the public defender. The bail is set at the beginning by a bail magistrate or a bail commissioner, and I think I described that earlier. Often that's done in a hurry, 6 hours after the arrest, 12 hours after the arrest, 18 hours after the arrest. Often that's how quickly it happens. And sometimes it happens when the defender, for example, has not even had a chance to talk to their client, which is wrong. And sometimes it happens when the DA's office has not been able to gather up all the information they would like to have to make a bail argument and to make the best bail argument. We do a lot of bail hearings a day. We are looking at ordinarily, and these are not ordinary times, but we're looking at about 110 to 130 cases a day where you're having bail hearings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's not a ton of prep time. And this is part of the reason that I'm on the same page with the public defenders in saying that for serious cases, we need to do this more like they do in DC with their no cash bail system, and more like they do it with the feds, which is that for serious cases, everybody's going to get a day to prepare, or maybe 2 days, and they're not going to do it in front of a bail commissioner. They're going to do it in front of a full-on judge who has done trials, has convicted people, has supervise them on probation and parole, and has that breadth of experience to be able to do it, right? But the point I want to make sure everybody's clear about, because people don't quite get this, is it is never the DA's office that sets the bail. It is the DA's office that makes a recommendation on bail. And after a person has their bail set initially, their defense attorney can always file a motion in different ways before judges to reduce the bail or to change a condition of bail. So there's an opportunity basically every day of a case for the defense to try to reduce it. But where everything starts, if you're talking about a shooting case or a felon in possession of a firearm, homicide case, where everything starts is in front of that bail commissioner with what I consider to be a rushed hearing that is good for neither side on the serious cases. We make our recommendation, but it is the bail commissioner's decision and power. Next slide, please. This is another very, very seldom understood point. So Philadelphia for many years has had a 10% bail program. What that means is if a bail commissioner says, I'm going to hold you on this shooting on $100,000 bail, that is not what you have to pay. The city will accept, under the rules in every case, 10%. So if a bail commissioner says $100,000 bail, the system doesn't mean it. What the system means is $10,000. And what makes it even worse is that we have private bail bonds people, sometimes known as the bail bondsmen in the old days. We have private bail bonds people. The way they make money is that they will pay your bail. They'll pay your $10,000. And their condition is you have to give them a third of that, but they get to keep it. City's going to give your money back at the end of the case. Bail bondsman is going to keep it. And then if you run off, it's going to chase you down to drag you in to make sure he doesn't lose his money. They're gambling on you're going to show up. So what does that really mean? That means a judge just said, I'm going to hold you on $100,000 bail. What you actually need to get out is $3,333. If that does not drop your jaw, then I don't know what will. Because to me, that is basically very, very confusing way to do things. I think it confuses the public. It can be confusing to a lot of people about what is actually going on in the system. Similarly, when you see a $1 million bail, and my office on shooting cases routinely asks for $1 less than that, $999,999 for reasons I could explain. What you actually need is not $1 million. It's $100,000. And if you get a bail bondsman, you're looking at a third of that. Well, you know, price of a kilo is often 20 grand, 22 grand for people who are heavily involved in serious drug dealing. They can come up with some money. I'm not saying they're necessarily going to come up with that. They might or might not. But some of them can come up with some money. So it's very important to remember as we show you the rest of the data that what it really takes to get you out on that bail is only 10% if you pay the city and only 3.33% if you pay a private bail bonds person. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we look at what happened, looking over the last several years, 2015 through 2019, with these different incidents, we had 13,171 incidents of homicide and ag assault with a gun. Of those, almost 4,900 people got arrested, 4,700 plus got charged, and then this is how the bail broke out. The way the bail broke out is 177 people didn't have to pay anything. 369 people got $1 to $10,000 bail, but as you know, 10,000 is really only 1,000 or $333. And even as you go up, 452 people got bail between 10,000 and 25K. They only had to pay 3% of that or 10% of that. 913 people got bail between 25K and 100K. And you have about 2,000 people getting bail that is 100K or more. 809 people were held without bail. Those are almost all people who were arrested for homicide because the Pennsylvania Constitution permits, almost presumes that you will be held without bail on a homicide case. Next slide, please. So we have done something new with the pandemic, which is that there is data on what bail is set, but there has not been data on exactly what the DA's office is asking for. And we had to make some tough decisions, and we decided that because of the pandemic, because of the need on the one hand to keep the jail population low, but on the other hand to make sure people who threaten public safety are in jail, we were only going to have 2 speeds on the car. The speeds were ROR, meaning you're released on your own recognizance, you don't have to pay anything, or a similar bail to that, or give me $1 million, $999,999. We picked that number because it allowed the jail to move people around in a way that was safer with COVID, and because we felt it was going to be adequate to hold a whole lot of people. As always, on homicide cases, we were moving for and getting held without bail. So this is an indication of how often the bail commissioners did what we asked them to do when we said, look, this is someone who should get out. Now, these would mostly be nonviolent offenses, often be misdemeanor offenses. And the good news is, because cash bail that keeps poor people in jail for no good reason is a bad thing, the good news is that the bail commissioners, 89% of the time, were with us in terms of giving ROR SOB. I do respect their independence. I would never want them to do exactly what we say all the time. But this is good news in terms of clearing space in the jail, stopping the spread of COVID, and frankly, making space for people who need to be held because they present a danger to public safety. Next slide, please. And this is what happens when we went in and we said, give us $999,999 in bail. I know this may be a little surprising, but I got to show it to you. We only got half of that or more 7% of the time. Okay? And let's remember, you're only paying 3 1/3%. So $500,000 is about 16 grand. $1 million is about 33 grand. $100,000, it only takes you $3,333 to get out. But what we got, and I say this respectfully to the courts, is a lot less than we wanted. What we wanted was enough bail to keep people who are running around shooting people and trying to kill people and who were felons in possession of a firearm in jail because they present a tremendous danger to public safety. We did not get it 89% of the time. We got it 7% of the time. And in that range between $100,000 and $500,000, which in actuality is between about $3,300 and $16,000, that was 1/3 of the cases. Almost half of the cases ended up between $10,000 and $100,000. These are cases where this office believed $1 million bail was necessary. What we ended up with for almost half of the cases, and then if you add in the 3% and the 9%, more than half of the cases, was a number to get out of jail that was less than $3,333. Next slide, please. All right, now this breaks it down just to gun cases so that you can see what happened, because in truth, most of our focus on that high bail was on cases that were specifically about gun violence. This is the category of cases where we asked for $999,000. I know that gets a little confusing. So this does not include the cases where we asked people be held without bail. There were many people held without bail. They were arrested on homicides. And they are not listed here just because they don't belong in this data set. But what we actually got on these gun cases is between $100,000 and $500,000, 56% of the time. If you actually look at how many people got less than $500,000, it's 56% plus 26% plus 1% plus 2%. We only got half of what we were looking for, 12% of the time, half or more, and we only got what we were actually looking for 3% of the time. Out of 923 cases, we got what we were looking for in 29. That is concerning to us, and it's concerning to us because we know of specific cases, and I know you know where I'm going, because our concern is that people who this office believes are truly a danger to society, and I would hope you all know me well enough to know by now that I'm no fan of keeping people in jail who shouldn't be there. But when this office says we feel that these people are truly a danger to the community, and we're practically begging judges to do what is necessary to at least keep most of them in jail, we're not getting a lot of love here. We got 15% out of the whole group that are given even half of the bail we asked for and more. Next slide, please. All right. So,
point of information, Mr. Chair. Mr.
Absolutely
Chair.
acknowledge.
Thank you.
Acknowledge.
So, I have a lot of respect for you and your office, but one of the things you are not accused of is wanting to keep unnecessarily people in jail. I will underscore and validate that. So when you do say that someone is dangerous, it seems to me that people should believe you.
Council member, you are singing my song, and I don't sing very well, but you are singing my song, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This slide indicates more specifically within what categories, within what kind of cases we did what. So we are looking in the top row at 243 cases of being a felon in possession of a firearm. It's a little more complicated than being a felon, but what I mean by that is you're a felon usually, or maybe you've committed a lower level of manslaughter. The law says you can't have a gun, right? Because of a prior conviction, you can't have a gun. We had 243 of those cases. We asked for that almost $1 million bail. It says here 97% of the cases. I think the reason you're not seeing 100% total is they're missing a little bit of data. But what happened when 97% of the time we said, give me this high bail, is that as you look over towards your right, only 16% of the time did we get even half of that. If you look at the next row, homicide, attempted homicide, 133 cases. There were 42% of these cases, 42. All right, something's wrong with that slide. Let's move to the next one. Aggravated, I think that may be a misprint, and it's supposed to be 92, but no, I'm sorry. Back to the other slide. There's obviously a flaw in that one piece of data. We will correct that. Hope to be invited back. Aggravated assault and firearm charge, meaning that you charge both with ag assault and with firearm. 97% of the time, we went after $999,000. We got more than 500,000 only 34% of the time. If you look at a rape case that involves a gun, which I believe is what this graph is, then you'll see that 94% of the time we were seeking that high bail, we only got half of it or more 11% of the time. Next slide, please. And this in many ways is not only the most colorful slide, but it's probably the most important slide because it shows, and I'll have to explain it because it's hard to look at, but it shows how often people made that bail. So this is the bail status of people who were charged with serious offenses, meaning did they post the bail? Were they able to pay the bail and get out? And what it shows here is that the serious offenses are homicide or attempted homicide, rape, 6105, which is being a felon in possession of a firearm, aggravated assault with a gun, or robbery with a gun. We look at the lower bail. When they were given between $10,000 and $100,000 of bail, 65% of them posted bail. When the bail was between $100,000 and $250,000, 37% posted bail. When the bail is between $250,000 and $500,000, 18% are still posting bail. It's only when you get up above $500,000 that we're getting down to lower numbers for posting bail. You still got 8% posting bail, but it still means 92% did not post that bail. So there is no question that the amount of bail has a very direct effect on whether or not people are able to pay it and get out. At the low level, 65% get out. At the highest level, 8% get out. And frankly, by the time we're asking for $1 million bail, we're pretty serious about it. In a perfect world, perhaps we'd even see more than 92%. But that is the point, that the amount of this bail and decisions made matter. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are questions about...
District Attorney Larry Krasner, just real quick, something another one of the questions that I sent over regarding bail that I didn't see a response to is how, so in cases where the bail that you are requesting isn't granted, how often, what's the percentage of appealing the decision? Can't you fight back the decision when they lower the bail or don't give you the bail? And you say, you know what? No, this person deserves to be away, so we want to fight back, and I'm gonna appeal your decision. What's the statistics or percentages around those appeals?
The problem we have with that, and this is part of the reason I've invited you to call us back, the problem we have with that is that we don't have a full data set on that. But let me say this, there are different phases where we can try to increase a bail. What you can do at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you just handled the list of 40 people whose bail was set, and you think something outrageous happened with a particular case, is that you can call a municipal court judge on the phone, and you can argue for that bail to be increased. And that is something that we do. But to be very candid, you don't want to do that all the time. Our municipal court judges, understandably, don't want every single decision that is made by the bail commissioner to be appealed to them. These are hearings I did myself in 1987, 1988 as a young public defender, and I used to appeal bails then. You might take your shot on 1 or 2 or 3, but if you're going to keep taking your shots and ask this municipal court judge to redo all of it, the likely outcome, honestly, is that they're going to be upset and they're going to make a point of denying all your appeals because they don't want to get called every 5 minutes. I mean, I'm just being candid with you. So sometimes we do appeal it at that phase. Sometimes we will appeal it when we show up for the preliminary hearing, ask for a bail increase, or we'll file a written motion. I can give you an example of a case where a judge imposed, I think, $90,000 on a gun violence case. I forget exactly what kind. We didn't like it. We filed a motion. We got it in front of another judge. We got it increased to $200,000, which again, I mean, that's not $1 million. That takes $6,666 to get out of jail, but it was better than $90,000. So we do appeal it, but we've also been trying, because culture change takes a minute. We've been trying to work with the bail commissioners to bring them along, to be persuasive, to appeal them some of the time. But clobbering, we find, usually doesn't work. I have to say this, though, I need you to, I need to make sure that I'm clear on this. I have a ton of respect for Judge Patrick Dugan, who is the president judge of the municipal court, and this falls under his umbrella. We've had a recent meeting with him where we've presented some data. I'm going to give him a full report of data very shortly that's going to show him more. And I believe that there's real possibility for constructive progress here. I also know and that Judge Dugan has mentioned that they've recently hired some very qualified people to be bail commissioners. We may be getting better results from them. But I do believe that Judge Dugan is a good judge. I think he's a good man. And I think that working with other criminal justice partners, we're going to be able to make some headway on this issue. All right. Now, this slide is up here for the purpose of showing what the public data dashboard looks like. It does have up-to-date information all the time. It is not perfect, and I'm going to give you an example of how it cannot be perfect. But it's a work in progress, and we think it's a pretty good work in progress. So here's an example. We were looking at the data on the number of cases that we dropped that were homicide cases. And the number looked higher than we expected in the last couple of years. So, you know, immediate panic, oh my goodness. Does that mean that we have done a bad job or that something's not right? And those were the numbers that were put in there by our data people, who are not necessarily attorneys or criminal attorneys. They're mostly data people. Well, when we looked at it, we realized that the problem was, yes, we had dropped some homicide cases. Those were cases where we had exonerated people. In other words, people convicted 25 years ago got a new trial because new evidence came out, because new DNA came out, whatever it may be. And then we did the right thing when we determined that they were innocent or that they were wrongfully convicted a bunch of ways, which is we dropped the case. So that was messing up our numbers because it was making us look like we were drop happy when we're not. At the same time, the other administrations that convicted innocent people are getting credit for their batting average because they're counting those innocent people they put in jail for 25 years. So I have to tell you, there are wrinkles here, and we're going to try to work through it. But this should be a pretty steady resource for folks in the courts, and it's updated regularly, and we're happy to assist if we can in making more data available or having someone, you know, provide instruction to your staff on how to use it. Next slide, please.
It's not wrong, and it's not wrong. It's because most of these are automatically without bail.
So that's something to clarify.
Okay. So this is a snapshot of case outcomes for homicide and ag assault with a gun from 2015 through 2019. And if you have us back, we will update it with 2020, even if it's just through, the month of October or whatever. But 13,171 incidents. And again, this homicide is about 80% shootings. It's about 20% other stuff. We're hoping that we'll be able to correct that as well. About 4,900 people arrested, about 4,700 people charged. The results were guilty pleas or nolo pleas, which means that you plead no contest and then you're found guilty. In about 1,700 of those cases, we had about 708 guilty verdicts, meaning taken to trial and convicted. There were about 29 diverted. And I can tell you that those are most likely to be cases where there is an accidental killing. That would be an involuntary manslaughter, which is actually a misdemeanor. For example, a fist fight between two brothers, and one of the brothers, due to intoxication in a fall, strikes his head and dies, something like that, because diversion is extremely uncommon in this group of 4,900 cases. There were about 1,800 dismissed or withdrawn. And again, I want to be candid with you. Shooting cases are tough to prosecute. Homicide cases can be tough. Homicide cases are tough because your main witness is unavailable. It is the person who was killed. Shooting cases can be tough because for the most part, not in every case, but in many cases, people involved in the shooting do not want to access the courts. They want to settle it on the street. So, a basic tenet of David Kennedy's system for what he calls focused deterrence, I think in Philly, is some version of that is being called gun violence intervention, is that it's necessary because historically and nationally it's tough to get convictions in these cases. There are 10 dismissed or withdrawn by exoneration in that time period. And then there were 466 that were not guilty acquittals at trial. Next slide, please. So the next slide is a cover sheet that's going to talk about the long-term outcomes, future arrests, charges, and shootings for people charged with possession with intent to deliver or VUFA. I think there we go. Next slide, please. We're moving a little slow, at least our technology is. So the next slide is about the frequency of future arrests or charges for shootings for people with prior possession with intent to deliver or VUFA convictions. This is just food for thought, frankly. Often the assumption is that if someone has a prior conviction for possession of a gun or for dealing drugs, then they are necessarily... Oh, I'm sorry. All right. It appears that my computer's not being friendly to me. So let me try to work off someone else's, because apparently you can all see the slide that I cannot see. So, I don't know if this is good news or bad, but it's the truth. So we might as well look at it. This is the frequency of future arrests or charges for shootings for people who have priors, okay? And it looks at a window from January of 2014 through September of 2020. So it's looking at basically a 5-year window. Within that 5-year window, how likely are you to be arrested as a shooter if you have a prior drug conviction? Within that 5.5-year window, how likely are you to be arrested for a shooting if you have a 6105, which is a felon in possession of a firearm? And within that 5-year period, how likely are you to be arrested for possession of a gun, 6106, 6108, and illegal possession of a gun with those priors? And the answer is, for a prior drug case, 1.2%. For a prior felon in possession, 1.9%. And for a prior VUFA, 6106, 6108, 1.9%. I have to tell you, honestly, that data surprised me
Councilmember
a little.
Councilmember Johnson, I have a point of information.
Absolutely. Acknowledge.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. District Attorney Krasner, I have some additional questions, but I'm going to allow you to finish your lengthy presentation. But in reference to this slide you're showing here, that directly contradicts the police department. So is my information, what I'm hearing from what you're saying, that if you are someone who's had a prior quid or VUFA charge, you're less likely to be involved in a future criminal activity? Yes or no?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, that's not what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying
And what
is that
you're saying?
if you have certain priors, then this, assuming this data is correct,
No,
and please,
no, we're not going to wait. This is your information and your data. So I'm assuming you're presenting it, so I'm assuming it's correct. So is it yes or no, more likely or not, that if you have a prior quid or VUFA and you have additional, there's more likely you're going to be arrested again for a similar type of offense?
as compared to what, council member? What's your comparison?
No, it's not about a comparison. I'm saying based on your information, you're saying it's less likely to be rearrested for a VUFA or a quid charge if you have a prior arrest?
Less likely than what, sir? I'm trying to understand.
I'm trying to understand you. Is it less likely you'll be arrested again in the future if you have a previous VUFA or quid charge?
Respectfully, sir, I don't understand the question.
Okay. I don't understand the slide. You're saying, okay, explain your slide, because you're saying that it's a 0.2%, 0.9%, and 1.9% based on this information, a frequency of future arrests or charges for shootings for people with prior quid or VUFA cases. So what is the basis of showing the slide? I'm just trying to understand.
The reason we are showing the slide is simply to point out something that we thought was curious, which is that oftentimes there's the assumption that if you have a prior conviction of certain types, then you're 50%, 70%, 80% likely to participate in a shooting. What we are seeing is there's obviously...
That's exactly what I just said. And that is what, from my observation and from listening to the police department, they're said a completely different perspective.
Well, I will be happy to discuss that with you, council member, or with them.
No, not about happy. I've been very patient, and I'm looking at your information, but I saw the information from the police department. They presented a different perspective.
Well,
So
I think that's
saying,
good.
Are
We have
you
different
saying,
perspectives. Don't you, council member, don't you think we should exchange ideas when there's a disagreement?
Are you saying that what the police department presented earlier corroborates what you're showing in this slide?
I don't know what slide you're referring to, sir, and I am not sure that they're covering the exact same topic, but if they are, it may be that one of those slides is incorrect. I am happy to explore that and to report back on your specific question.
I'm going to go specifically to the slide. I'm going back to the information. And what is the trend and proportion of VUFA arrests that result in a conviction? And I believe that slide is information that shows and was based on, I believe, Officer Singleton's commentary is that we need to do a better job in doing arrests, specifically with those who've had priors. I may mischaracterize, but based on the information I'm seeing on this slide, based on the slide I'm looking at right now, there's a difference of opinion. And you even said in your statement, there's a general assumption that people that have a prior are more likely to have a prior going forward. And based on what the police department is saying, that is contradictory. I'm just trying to understand the basis of your slide when you're showing in the heading to this slide, frequency of future arrests or charges for shootings for people with prior quid or VUFA cases.
Council member, obviously, I'm looking at whatever slide you were looking at.
I'm looking at the slide you're presenting.
It may be that what they were presenting.
Okay. Let's make it plain. Let's just make it plain. What does this slide present in plain English? What you're showing? Because you did say there was an assumption that people have that if you have certain prior cases, you're more likely to be involved in similar type of cases going forward. And you said, based on what you were saying in this slide, this is to show that is not the case.
Well, the title of this slide is the frequency of future arrests or charges for shootings for people with a prior quid, which is, of course, drug dealing, or a VUFA case. These are people who have had a prior case for just those offenses. There are many other offenses, and it is likely that these percents are going to go up if you include everybody who has a shooting case and has some kind of prior. So they may, for example, have a prior for burglary, or they might have a prior for robbery. This doesn't cover that. This just goes to the issue of whether the possession of a weapon itself is a red arrow saying that you're necessarily going to do a shooting, or the involvement in drugs is a red arrow saying you're necessarily going to do a shooting. It's a pretty narrow issue, frankly. And like I said, surprising to me, because my gut would be that these numbers would be higher. I am, however, I'm very interested in your inquiry.
So based on that understanding, and now I get a little more perspective of what you're saying, that based on having a prior quid charge or VUFA charge is not necessarily a higher probability you're going to have another future arrest based on those type of past cases.
I think that's right, sir. Yes,
okay.
And I'm more than happy to look into this further.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir. Next question. I'm sorry, next slide. Okay. So you can't fix what you don't measure. Next slide. Our preliminary analysis does show that more gun cases are failing to make it past the preliminary hearing required to get to court of common pleas. We have heard a very, very capable attorney, Deb Watson-Stokes, talk about her review of various files in the course of her supervision. But we've also made a decision, because this is concerning to us, that we need to be more scientific about it and more precise, and therefore, in order to determine why the drop rate for gun cases in municipal court has increased over time, we have to look at the files, which is what we are doing. Next slide. So the data lab is working with a group of ADAs to go through what is currently about 400 cases, where over a period of years there have been dismissals. We want to see to what extent Deb Watson-Stokes' impression that the civilian witness would not show up, or that the judge, properly or improperly made a decision about the quality of the evidence when we put on the case, or whether there could be superior investigation done or some improvement on the investigation by our office or by the DA's office. We want to see whether the DA failed to do a good job. We want to make sure people were subpoenaed. We want to do all of that. And therefore, if invited back, we will actually bring the results of that analysis to show why certain cases are being discharged for lack of prosecution, discharged for lack of evidence. It could lead to some very positive things. Next slide, please. It could, for example, lead to issues around training. This just lists a few of the possibilities. Number one, guns not recovered, which makes a weaker case. Number two, civilian or police witness fails to appear. Number three, evidence obtained by police was legally insufficient. And I think Deb Watson-Stokes talked about that in terms of trying to prove that a gun in a car is connected to a particular person beyond a reasonable doubt. Evidence may be suppressed due to a flawed procedure. So there's some discussion about that coming from First Deputy Commissioner with the Hicks case, for example. Prosecutor may have made an error, and if so, it's a training issue for us. Or there may actually be a situation where we just think the judge got it wrong, and as she mentioned, we often refile those cases. And we are happy to provide all that information upon completion. That is all I have in this actual presentation, and therefore I invite any questions that any council members may have.
Well, call Council Curtis Jones. But I did have a question though. I like the data lab information, right? In terms of, so would that be the equivalent of a quality insurance? So when the case doesn't report, or a person basically beats the case in court, would the data lab part be the quality insurance where you would go back and review and say, well, wait a minute, here's where the gap was, here where you maybe have a lack of evidence or paperwork wasn't done correctly on the police side? Like, that's what I'm getting at.
So the data lab is primarily
did I
not
say it correctly.
You did say it correctly, but it's not. The data lab itself is more the data people. We have a team of very experienced attorneys who are looking at the files, because the truth is that the police department doesn't have access to our files, and the files often tell the tale. Let's say, for example, you dig into a file and it says that the police officer who's crucial to the case is, for some reason, someone we cannot call because he's under federal investigation or something like that. That would be a very specialized type of reason, but we can look at all those cases, pull that out, and figure it out. So it's a collaborative effort between the data lab, but more importantly, having some of our most experienced attorneys look at the files, look at the notations in the files, and look at other factors to try to figure out where there was a breakdown.
So in the police department's presentation, they talked about the simultaneous decrease of the conviction rate, right? So how do you review from a quality standpoint if the conviction rate is steadily over a period of time? And also, we saw prior to you coming, we also seen it steadily going down. How do you pinpoint and say, okay, we see our conviction rate pretty much is going down? From a quality standpoint, how do you address that to make sure that you're keeping the bad guys where they need to be in terms from a prosecution standpoint, and that conviction rate starts to go back up?
Man, I think we have to just be really honest in our evaluation. We got to get in there and we have to look at it. And, you know, what I heard the police department saying is that they're down. They are down to look and see if there's more they could have done. Well, we are also down to look and see if there's more that we could have done. You know, and sometimes it's a shared issue. So I'll give you an example of a case we saw. There was a case where you have a gun, which is in the back of the car. There's not really sufficient evidence to prove, because to prove connection to the driver does not own the car. It's, you know, it's in the trunk, it's under a spare tire. Yeah, you've heard of that. So anyway, so good news is the police swabbed the gun. The bad news is police did not swab the driver. And when we got it, it takes so long to get a DNA analysis that once the arrest was made and we got it, no swab was done in time, because it takes quite a while to get DNA results back in order to have a solid case for a preliminary hearing. That's the kind of thing where you could say it's our fault. I'll take it. It's our fault. You could say it's their fault. They'll take it as their fault. But what we should do is we should make sure we have a mechanism so that does not happen anymore. And so that we're able to make that match. It involves some work. You know, it involves getting a warrant, doing a swab, sending it off to a lab. And, you know, honestly, when you have hardworking police officers who are trying to move cases along and their feeling is, I got the gun off the street, I sent it to the lab for DNA, they might not take that extra step. Well, maybe we can train, or we can assist, or we can even have some DAs, detectives ourselves jump in and try to take that role and push it forward. But it's not the kind of thing we want to figure out, you know, in a courtroom. It's a thing we want to try to figure out up front.
Understood. You know what, Larry, and this comes to my mind, right? And just dealing with this, just in terms of all of us as public servants, I just know when the opioid crisis hit suburban America and rural America, right? Some way, somehow, the stars just aligned, right? And it became a zero-light focus of resources and support all the way around the board. The zero-light focus on the opioid crisis that's devastating suburban America, rural America, and I'm just hoping at some point in time that all of us here in the city of Philadelphia, and this presentation, and also and Commissioner Outlaw presentation, seems like we're going in the right direction, because at least folks are saying we're willing. I heard you say a couple of times, I'll put things on my shoulder, she'll put things on her shoulder, but just the sense of urgency that I'm feeling, that needs to be there all the way around the board. But I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Curtis Jones and Councilman Derek Green, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm a end where I started. That I've had opportunity to be in certain rooms, hear certain presentations, and out of each of those presentations, I took a little bit of hope away, because people have a renewed focus on working together. When people break down silos and don't get defensive and are willing to say, my bad, stop looking at blame and start looking at solutions, we have a real opportunity to get stuff done. And so I say, when I heard Commissioner Outlaw say that, and then I heard you say it again, and I listened to your very competent staff talk about some of the realities that sometimes we sitting in city council chambers, not sitting in a judge's chambers, have to understand that there is theory and then there is practicality. And so I learned this lesson from CJAD, Criminal Justice Advisory Board. When all of the different players sat in a room, realizing that they were sitting in the same boat and were interconnected in their responsibilities, magical things, and I don't want to be corny with it, but good things happen. I think we are on the precipice of getting at this problem. As the chairman said, you know, when the opioid crisis hit and other crises hit, we tend to create a Marshall Plan to address that problem. Our babies are dying at a rate of 300 plus this time of year, and people shrug their shoulders. All right, we are being used as a political football by number 45, saying, look at what Democratic-run cities are doing. And if you're not careful, it's coming to a suburb near you. Now, let's take the politics aside, because it's not a red thing. It's not a blue thing. It is a deadly thing, all right, as you said. So I am optimistic that if we keep this cooperative attitude, that we're going to look at a PERT chart, process, evaluation, review, technique chart. And we're going to look and say, we're going to put time motion on things and say, you know, this happened right here and it resulted in that result. Maybe if we tighten this screw right here, bail. Maybe if we loosen this screw up a little bit and just move out the cases that are not as urgent in the sense of that this person is likely to shoot or be shot, and we really start to drill down on this, we have a shot of convincing the public that we actually know what we're doing and are doing something, but also convincing the actors that we're not playing with them anymore. That we will protect 7-year-old kids playing on their porch. And that, yeah, we want you to be the best you can be. But some of my best friends, and I'm sure Chairman Johnson will agree, got that way to become the best versions of themselves after they did a dime for 20 years in jail. They discovered themselves. And sometimes you may be saving their life.
My life. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Just for the record, I just want to acknowledge that the actual homicide clearance rate for the Philadelphia Police Department is 47.68%. Just want to note that for the record, because I know the slide that was put up by Commissioner Outlaw was 29%. So I just wanted to state that for the record. Councilman Derek Green.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. District Attorney Krasner, thank you for the presentation. I have noticed that since you've come into office, some of the things that you've done in reference to community outreach, as well as the data, I have seen the regular data information that you provided has been very helpful, providing some information and perspectives that we have not seen in the past. The question I have for you and also for Commissioner Outlaw and for Judge Tucker, and what leads me to some of the frustration, not only on my own end on what we as City Council are not doing enough, but I guess because I have a little more inside baseball perspective because of my past experiences, I'm trying to get an understanding of why we've had a 33% increase in homicides over the past few years. A number of the issues that you raised that have been raised today are issues that have been there for some time. But those issues in 2018 and 17 and 16 are similar to now, but that doesn't explain the increase in homicides. And so I'm really trying to get a perspective from you in a very simple, plain English way, based on your observation, what has caused the increase in homicides?
Council member, thank you very much, and I do appreciate your experience as a prosecutor. I'm familiar with it, and it does give you, I think, some inside baseball. But let me still try not to go inside. Let me try to be simple with it. There is the long-term issue and the short-term issue. I think the immediate spike, terrible as it is in shootings and in homicides, has a lot to do with what is in fact a national phenomenon. There was some mention of our president. Well, here's the truth.
Wait. I hate to jump in. But I really want you to keep the focus on in the city of Philadelphia, when you say national phenomenon, the current occupant of public housing on Pennsylvania Avenue on Black Lives Matter Plaza was there in 2018. So I really would like you to focus on what has happened over the past couple of years that have led to the increase in homicides.
Okay, so the increase in homicides is 7 years old, but in the last couple of years.
No, but but we can agree there's been there's been an increase, but there's also been a significant increase in the past couple of years. We can agree it's been 33 to 32%. You can quibble on those percentages, but that specific rise, that's what I'm going to get some perspective on.
Well, I want to be as candid as I possibly can. There's no question the pandemic has played its role here in Philadelphia. There's no question about that. I also think that it is very likely that some of the issues that have been illuminated today, having to do with clearance rates, have had their impact. I think that is, in fact, part of it. Philadelphia does have a chronic history of high levels of poverty and relatively high levels of violence, which goes back. But that is, in fairness, that is a constant which has been with the city for a very long time.
Correct.
I think that in different moments there have been different issues. Commissioner Ross had statistics which seemed to me to be credible to point out that 1 year's big increase was almost entirely owing to drug-related homicides because he categorized homicides by motive. That was what he had. I accepted that as being right. We were in an opioid crisis at that time. The statistics now are actually a little bit different. What we are seeing and what I am hearing more and more from police personnel is that we're seeing more and more disrespect. We're seeing more and more arguments. We're seeing more and more internet-based conflict and retaliation that goes back. So I think there may be a little bit of a shift in that aspect of it. But I also have to be candid with you, council member. I don't know for sure. I think there's a lot of criminologists with PhDs who also are not sure. But I know this. I know that I want to work with you. I want to work with council. I want to work with PPD and with the city to do everything we can do. We continue to make our own efforts, and I won't tick them off. But I want to work with everyone here to try to make it better as quickly as we can, pandemic or not.
And I respect that answer because I think that's something that we're all struggling with. And I think I'm glad you gave that answer because we received a lot of information, and I was really trying to focus on specifically what has led to the increase. And I think that's something we're all grappling with. I think of something in the response made by the commissioner, and I would agree with some of her analysis, although she's still somewhat new to the city of Philadelphia, that we're dealing with a different type of dynamic in reference to those who are engaging in criminal behavior. It tends to be younger, tends to have less of a fear of certain repercussions and certain issues, don't have the fear of doing a crime with or without a gun, are more likely to put things on social media that they did or willing to do. And so that also has created a concern, and we're going to have to adjust accordingly from a criminal justice perspective. And I think, and I was listening to Councilmember Jones talking about CJAB, and I think there needs to be some type of vehicle where all levels of the public elected leadership are involved in an ongoing entity. And I'm talking from the public safety entities, being District Attorney's Office, PD, Police Department, First Judicial District. Not saying the leadership of every entity needs to be in those meetings, but a person with responsibility to make decisions, as well as the legislative branch and the executive branch, to have a real focus on how we're going to do things differently in providing resources to address people who've had issues, but also letting people know, because I do unfortunately believe there is a belief and an unfortunate perception is a reality that if I decide to do certain type of activity in a criminal way, I'm not going to have any repercussions. And that is a perception that's out there, and unfortunate perception is reality. And when you take that perception with young people that, not all young, but more and more young people that don't have a fear of certain issues that I think has led to this dynamic. And that's why we've got to do things differently. And we've got to do things collaboratively. And so some of my frustration, and I try to be very patient, was hearing a lot of information, but I didn't really get to that information I was looking for until your last commentary.
Well,
I have
thank
the
you,
same
Council.
question for Commissioner Outlaw as well as Judge Tucker as well.
Very well. Thank you, sir.
First and foremost, I want to thank everybody for their patience over these last couple of days to host this hearing. We want to adjourn to Tuesday, September the, shoot the exact date. Excuse me, everyone.
That's Tuesday, September 8th, Councilman.
You're on mute, Chair.
Okay, sir.
You're breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Okay. We're going to adjourn till Tuesday, September the 8th, 9:30 a.m. And we will have testimony from Assistant Brandon O'Malley and Supervising Judge of the Courts, Judge Tucker. I do want to ask, I know all of my schedules are busy, but obviously we're in a state of emergency as it relates to gun violence. And so, in the event that you can make yourself available, if there's additional questioning, if Attorney Krabs as well as Commissioner Outlaw, not to give a presentation, not to be on the panel, but if they're in follow-up as it relates to the bail system, on which was discussed significantly today, which Judge Tucker is going to talk about. It would be great just to have to do a back and forth in terms of clarity. That would be good. And the same thing goes for Brendan O'Malley, who represents the Attorney General's office and the Gun Violence Task Force, which also I know is housed out of the AG's office as well as your office.
Yes.
That would be helpful as well. But for the most part, at the end of the day, the information was very, very helpful that came through. Again, I always want to say that we're not only in a state of emergency, but we're in a crisis, and everybody needs to be on the same page as we address this issue and making sure that this issue is urgent as possible. And so I do thank everyone. Have a good holiday weekend, and we shall see folks on Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Great work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.